Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Woo You event. Our first topic for tonight is how to integrate myopia management into practice. Our presenters are myself and Dr. Jamie Kuznier. So I'll be your host tonight as well to help moderate. And this will be worth 1 hour. This presentation will be worth 1 hour of CE credit. So please be sure to attend for a minimum of 50 minutes. For the COPE certificate, please fill out the survey link that's in the chat, and it'll also be there when the webinar ends. The CE certificates will be delivered via email and sent to ARBO with your OE tracker numbers. We're not going to have a QR code tonight, but you'll get that CE certificate within about 4 weeks. All questions you can ask in the Q&A box for the presenters. And then if you have something that you want to reach out to the WooU team about, you can do that in the chat section. You can find the Q&A at the top there if you're on your mobile device, and then the chat under those three dots under more. So I'll be speaking on this topic as well. I'm not going to read my full bio, but I just really love myopia control. In particular, I love orthokeratology, and it's a big part of my practice. So I'm excited to speak on that tonight. Here are my financial disclosures. Then I'm excited to introduce my partner in crime for this presentation. Jamie is the founder of Elevate Eye Care and Eyewear in Rochester Hills, Michigan, and earned her doctorate of optometry from Michigan College of Optometry at Ferris State University and completed a cornea and contact lens residency at Indiana University. She specializes in fitting gas permeable and scleral contact lenses, specializes in myopia management and orthokeratology. She's also a business guru. So Colt started this practice, and it is thriving now with a big specialty focus in myopia management and specialty contact lenses. So it's going to be great to hear from her on the business aspect of orthokeratology and myopia in private practice. Here are her financial disclosures, all of which have been mitigated. So Jamie, I've done enough talking. I'm going to have you take it from here.
All right. And I like how you read my full bio, but just kind of like dismissed yours. But I'm sure all of you attending the call have probably heard Dr. Serenzi speak, and she's wonderful. So I'm excited for you guys to see what she has to say too, because every time I co-lecture with her, I learn a lot that I bring back into my own practice. So we're going to talk about how to integrate myopia management into practice. There you go. So the first things we're going to start out at is just looking at what are some of the necessities that you need for myopia management versus some of the nice to haves, right? I think a lot of times when you look at bringing in a new specialty within your practice, whether it be dry eye, specialty contacts, ortho K, it's kind of overwhelming. Like, what equipment do I need to start implementing? So we'll talk about what you should bring in right away and maybe what's great down the road. We'll talk a little bit about some conversations to conversions. We'll look at marketing for growth. Like I said, there's a lot of really, really good pearls in here that I also took back that I'm going to start implementing immediately. We're going to talk about financials too. And there's a really good guideline of how to set your fees appropriately for myopia management because there's always such a wide variety. And I think that's actually one of the number one questions that I get a lot from my colleagues is how do we know how to set fees? Because it's not something that's just on Medicare guidelines, like with everything else that we do. So how to exactly set an appropriate fee that makes sense for your practice and for the families that you're helping out. And then we'll also touch a little bit about training your team as well, just to set your office up for the best success. So let's start with, oh yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to say, we wanted to give you guys a little peek into our practices. So this is my office in Charlotte and then my office in Raleigh. And I really wanted to have kind of like a relaxed home feel to the practice. But one thing that you can see, I wish I had a better picture for my Charlotte office, but we have this little like kids nook in the corner where there's games. There's like a little chalkboard a chalk wall that they can draw on. We always have snacks aplenty, little juice boxes. So, kids leave hyped up on sugar when Would they go? We have healthy snacks too, but and then in the corner at the Raleigh office, we have a little spot for kiddos too. So it's just kind of like a way to let parents know that we see kids. This is, our in our wheelhouse of specialty, and we have our their own little spot for them in the office.
And then here is my office here. So I'm in Rochester Hills, which is in the Metro Detroit area of Michigan. I have a couple little images of my gadgets here. I've actually expanded and grown a little bit more with my gadgets in my pre-test room. But the main thing that the comments that I get a lot from parents is how high tech the office is and how clean it is. So um, I know I don't have as wide of images as Dr. Sorenzi did, but one thing that my staff does a really good job at is just everything's very kind of clean, neat, hygienic. And I think a lot of moms in particular feel like their kids are safe there. I love the idea that you have like the little chalkboard and stuff because sometimes I feel like parents are afraid to bring their kids into an area that looks like too nice, right? Like too put together. So sometimes it's nice to have those little touches that you do see kids there. But yeah, having the nice newest technology has really just brought in a lot of patients to me just because they see that we have things that are different than maybe they've seen at the other offices down the road.
For sure. And so that kind of goes into the next topic of, what are the necessities versus nice to have? Like you have all of this amazing equipment at your office and top of the line and every category. What do you feel like people absolutely need to have versus are the nice to haves?
So obviously a lot of the necessities everyone is already going to have in your office, right? You need a slit lamp. You need you need to be able to do a refraction. I actually feel like if you're, especially if you're doing ortho K, you need to have a topographer. Okay. Otherwise, it's going to be practically impossible to design an appropriate lens for your patient and monitor their progression at their follow-ups of how well that treatment is looking. Nice to haves would be obviously axial length. But a lot of places might not have that on day one. I don't have that right away because especially if you're a cold start, it's like there's so many things that you have to buy. So I would say the necessities is you definitely need a good topographer that you can design a lens on. But everything else you really should have in your office. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I probably should have added like a fluorescein strip on there because I feel
Yeah.
like slit lamp and fluorescein strips is all you need for just making sure that the corneas are okay. But I agree with orthokeratology, you really need to have a topographer. Um, One question I get asked a lot is, well, do I really need axial length? I think it's really helpful to have axial length because it tells us an objective measurement that, we all know how refractions go with kiddos. Um, and it can also tell us that there's potentially going to be changes before we can maybe see that in a refraction. We can see axial length progressing pretty rapidly in the hyperopic state and know that maybe we need to do some more counseling on ways to slow the eventual onset of myopia. But some people think that, maybe they could just start with ultrasound biometry versus optical biometry. And I don't know. I just kind of feel like if it were me, I would want to just buy a used optical biometer just because of the accuracy. The ultrasound biometers, I mean, the repeatability is within like zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3
hmm
millimeters versus an optical biometer is within zero point zero 0.04. So I feel like if you're gonna do biometry, just get a used optical biometry instrument. What are your thoughts on that, Jamie?
So one little creative thing that I did, and I'm sure a lot of you, whether you work with an ophthalmologist in your practice, or maybe you have one that you refer to for cataract surgery, I have a great one that's a couple miles away, and I just set up an agreement with him that I can send kiddos over and get scanned, and they just do like a cash pay procedure visit. Like he doesn't even see them; he just has like the technician do the measurement and sends it back to me, and that's been a great way where. If I don't have that extra money to invest in it right now because I'm a cold start, to be able to still get those measurements at least for the kids. So one way to do it. It is a little trickier if it's one more stop for the parents to have to make. But one creative way that you can still get those measurements at the beginning, especially when you're first starting out with myopia management.
That's cool. That's really cool. And then I'm sure it kind of helps with the reciprocating type,
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they already are sending you like specialty lens patients, dry eye patients, whatever, it's nice to kind of have that co-management agreement with them where it's really going both ways, to be honest.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like probably the hardest part about myopia management and is really the conversations when these parents come in. They're really just thinking about one thing, like, is my kid going to need glasses this year or not? Are we going to need to update their glasses? And so what we really wanted to talk about first is how can we get to yes. So, you have the refraction, you've determined that they are progressing. And now all of a sudden you start talking about myopia management to a parent.
Mhm.
They're going to have lots of emotions. They
Right.
might be a little bit anxious hearing about their child's vision worsening and that it's a concern for you. They may be kind of, you know, worried. So really, as all of these things are going on in their mind, I think it's important to really be very mindful about the conversation and very purposeful in how it's presented to just help the parent understand the importance of finding a solution for their child versus just continually prescribing stronger and stronger glasses or contacts every year. So to me, I think I created a template for myself where I I will say pretty much the same thing every time because if I don't, I ramble and I think the message would get lost in just my rambling. So I'll say something along the lines of Johnny's vision has worsened versus changed. I feel like that
Hmm.
word's pretty powerful, and this concerns me. And then from there, I think the one of the most powerful things that you can show a parent is how their child sees the world. So I like to put plus lenses over their eyes to demonstrate myopia. So I would use plus lenses and say, last year when they saw me, they were a minus a quarter. I'll put those plus a quarter lenses over their eyes. This is how they saw the world last year. Well, this year, now that their vision has worsened, this is how they're seeing the world. Now they're a minus one, so I'll show the plus ones, and then you can go ahead and just project to next year or maybe 2 years down the line and say something along the lines of, if we don't do anything about this, this is potentially what their vision will worsen to next year. Um, I found that this is probably the most helpful thing or most impactful thing that I can do to parents for them to see the world through their child's eye because they may not be myopic themselves, or maybe they are myopic and they just kind of forgot what it was like to slowly, you know, basically lose this clarity over time. Do you do something like this, Jamie?
Um, Not exactly. I mean, it's a really great idea. One little pearl I would say though is make sure the parent's not a latent hyperope. Because I have
Yeah.
done this before and it's like you put a plus one and they're like, oh, it looks pretty good to me. And you're like, oh shoot, right? I think it's more difficult for parents that are not myopic to like fully understand, right? It's so much easier when you already have a parent that's like a minus five or a minus six because they do remember what it was like. I'm a high myope myself. I'm about a minus seven. So I always, usually the parents are like anything that we can do to make it so that they're not like me. Right. Or sometimes, even
Yeah.
if like the partner knows that like maybe the dad has really poor vision, they can say, oh my gosh, my husband's vision is so poor. Like they can kind of relate that way. I think the harder sell is when the parents have, perfect vision. Maybe they're a low hyperope or an emmetrope. And I think we're seeing that a lot more and more with how kids are progressing rapidly, even with parents that are emmetropic.
Hmm. I didn't think about the latent hyperope. That's
I usually will
this
like
actually looks great.
yeah, right. So I would maybe like add an extra diopter to that just to like, make sure. But I do like the one thing where you said, this concerns me. I actually heard a lecture, a glaucoma lecture, with Dr. April Jasper, and she gave that as well, that if you are doing an exam and you tell the patient, no matter what you want to tell them, if you say, I'm seeing something that concerns me, it kind of triggers them to like, oh my gosh, this, I need to pay really close attention to the next thing that the doctor has to tell me. And she said that about
Mhm.
glaucoma. And I think that's a really good word to just kind of, get the parents' attention. Maybe they're scrolling on their phone or trying to attend to another child in the room or whatever. And if you say, I see something on your child that concerns me, your mom ears are going to like perk up, like, okay, this is important. It's not just here's a pair of glasses, right?
Right. Yeah. Um, I was presenting, I forget where I was, but one of the doctors said that he keeps a balloon in his exam room and he'll show the parents by blowing the balloon up until it's about to pop and say that this is what your child's eye is doing. It's continuing to elongate, it's continuing to get longer. And he says that he blows it up till it's about to pop. And I personally
Oh,
think that's terrifying.
yes. That's
But he
really
said that it was
scary.
really impactful. um, but I really like to focus on the emotion side of things, like
Mhm.
because we don't know that they're going to have some of this disease later in life. It's certainly an increased risk. But I really like to think about the quality of life implications and the visual changes that are happening right now in the chair. And I found that that's what was most powerful of a message to parents versus the scare tactics of diseases that they don't really know what the heck
Mhm.
they are. Maybe they've heard of them once or twice, like glaucoma, myopic macular degeneration, retinal detachments. So that's personally what I've found works, but maybe in some of your offices, maybe scare tactics would work better, where you focus more on the risk of disease later in life. I think parents are very attuned to how the visual environment of children is very different now.
Mhm.
Um, Anytime that you talk to a parent about screen time, um, just using screens not only at home or for leisure, but also at school, it makes sense to them why their child's vision is myopic and why it may be different from what they experienced growing up. Jamie, after you have a converse like the myopia talk with the patient in the exam room, what are the next steps from there?
So usually I do like to have a handout to give to the parent because it's a lot of information, especially if they just came in as like a routine new patient exam. So maybe they might not have had like the primary caregiver with the child, and they're just, it could be a grandparent, it could be a anybody that brought the child in. It's nice to have a handout to bring back to, talk to the other partner just so that they can be aware of what's going on. I like to have my technician actually follow up though too. So I do this as well with like dry eye, anything where I'm talking about, something that might be a bigger investment that the patient might not fully be expecting or understand. I usually will, task my technician to follow up after a few days, either with like a phone call, email, text, whatever the patient prefers, just to ask like if there's any additional questions that you thought of once you got home. That way we can clarify everything for you. And a lot of times too, and I know we were talking about getting to the yes, I think sometimes you have to realize that even if a parent says no, it doesn't necessarily mean no forever. It might be no in this minute because I need to do my research. And so usually I'll just say, you know what, let's do a follow up in like 3 to 6 months, depending on, the age, how much progression they had. And we'll just do a check on their glasses just to make sure that their eyes aren't getting worse. I don't want to wait a full year. And then you can have that nice follow up. If their eyes are getting worse, which they likely will be, then you can kind of say like, do you want to, maybe reconsider or think about some of these options? Do you have any extra questions for me? So I pre-schedule them if there is like a no or a not right now. We pre-schedule them so that we don't lose them for like another 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up because it is such a defeating feeling when you're told no and you kind of think, well, did I say something wrong? Could I have said it better? And you kind of, I mean, I do anyways, where I think it's my fault that this child is going another 6 months without some sort of intervention. So thank you for sharing that. Some of when I was first building up the myopia management practice, I would send a follow-up email, and I would say, thank you for having this conversation today. Just to summarize our conversation, and then I would have just kind of a pre-written template. Myopia is this, it's a concern because of this. Based off of the fact that Johnny really loves swimming, I'm recommending orthokeratology as one of the best options that not only will slow his myopia, but also will give him the freedom to enjoy swimming and do some of these activities that he really likes to do without having to worry about correction. And I think that little bit of customization goes a long way. I think that this is something that you could give to one of your team members to do, just have a template and customize it based off of the conversation that you're having with the child about what they enjoy doing, what kind of sports they're in, if they enjoy reading, stuff like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and so that's like kind of leads into the considerations too. A lot of times it's, what modality of myopia management are you going to pick for that child? And a lot of it is I'm kind of deciding as I'm assessing the child and doing their examination, and I can already figure out by the end of the exam with them what I think is going to be the best option for them. And some of it's like, how wiggly are they in the chair? How hard was it to take the measurements? Did they seem like they were super scared getting IOP measurements done? How are they going to be able to put a contact in? Then I just kind of ask about their activities, like you said, like, do you swim a lot? Are you a dancer? Do you do gymnastics? A lot of those things would be a great candidate for Ortho K. And then I also kind of get a feel for how the parent is, right? So I just had a parent that was in on Friday, and she was definitely one of those helicopter moms that was like all over it. And for her, she's like, I can't imagine my 8-year-old, doing contacts. I'm a little bit nervous about it. So for her, she opted to start with atropine until he got a little bit older. And so sometimes you have to see the dynamic of the kid and the parent as well. So there's a lot of like maturity, hygiene, extracurriculars. But kind of what I wanted to talk about too, I think we're talking, is it next that we're going to talk about, is my kid too young for contacts, right? I just had
Yeah.
the same exact conversation exactly on Friday morning. And it was funny because we were prepping for this lecture, and I'm like, these are the questions that come up like every single time you talk to a parent, right? I think my kid is too
Yeah.
young for contacts, right? And I always love to reference this study because actually the younger kids, that 18 to 12-year-old, have a lower incidence of having complications from contacts than the older ones, right? So you have
Mhm.
concrete studies. It's not just, most of the kids in my practice do fine. It's no, there's studied over 1,000 children, and they had a less than 1%, issue, whether that be like abrasion, conjunctivitis, there was no vision loss versus your 18 to 25-year olds, which is going to be, they leave the house and go to college. And maybe they don't have the best hygiene practices, or they're kind of implementing their own independence as a young adult. So I always compare that to the parents, and they're like, oh, yeah, I guess that totally makes sense because they kind of remember their college days, right? So what I just say, you're supervising your child, and you can actually teach them really good contact lens hygiene habits early. So they probably will be a better contact lens wearer, starting now versus when I start them, if they go off to college and they're being a new contact lens wearer.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes I'll say, if I have a good relationship with the patient, your child wearing contact lenses is probably safer than you wearing contact lenses based off of what the data tells us. Um, and some kind of going back to this slide here, there will be cases where you'll have a kid that is a candidate for soft contact lenses, orthokeratology, and atropine, and some of these considerations that Jamie walked through really really are great to be able to customize what is going to work best. Because for the most part, a lot of the myopia management options they're relatively similar in terms of their efficacy. So what's
Mm-hmm.
going to work the best is going to be what they actually wear and what the parent is okay with.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to talk about, well, we know that contact lens wear is very safe in the studies, and also from, my personal experience seeing a lot of these children. And also what we know for sure is that for every additional diopter that your child progresses, or every I'll call it like a step, four
Hmm.
steps, their risk of these diseases increases significantly. And this is a paper by Dr. Mark Bullimore. And you can see just for one diopter of change, the risk of these myopic macular degeneration, glaucoma, retinal detachments increases significantly. And these are big boy numbers.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of times too, especially if you have a child that might be getting a little bit older, like they're still a teenager, it's like, well, is it even worth it at this point? And I say yes. Like any time is worth it. Every diopter counts. So it doesn't matter if it's the diopter from 1 to 2 or from 5 to 6. Um, every diopter really counts for that as well. And then what happens if
Mhm.
we wait, right? Well, what happens if we don't do anything? Well, we already know that. We have how many decades of research to know, and usually the parents have gone through this firsthand. Like it will continue to get worse with glasses, right?
Mhm.
And once that change happens, I can't go back and reverse it. And especially because usually at this point, I'm describing that, myopia or nearsightedness is the eyeball getting longer from front to back. That's the way I describe it. And so, if the
Mhm.
eyebrow grows longer, I can't shrink it back down. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Just to kind of keep it in like simple terms. I'm not talking about axial length specifically, but just, the eyeball is getting longer from front to back. If it keeps progressing, like I'm not gonna be able to shrink them back down again, right? It's like your kid goes through a growth spurt, they can't magically go back to being 5 feet tall when they're already 5'2", right? So, and the
Yeah, that's
earlier
a
we
great
start,
comparison.
yeah, the earlier we start, the more impact. So we do know, the younger kids, and I think the next slide actually shows it too. But the earlier we start, the more impact that we have, right? And this is a nice little calculator that you can bring up too. It's from the Brian Holden Institute, and you can actually plug in the age, refractive error of the child, the type of management that you're using, and it can actually graph it out for the parents to show like if we don't do anything, this is an estimate of where they'll be by the age of 17. If we do implement, whatever modality you're picking, this is kind of what we expect to have for the control. I think the next slide I wanted to pop into. You want to jump to that? Oh, maybe not. Maybe
Yeah,
I think
we
we can
delivered
find
that
it.
one.
Yeah, that's okay. But yeah, just like the earlier you implement, the better. They are just going to keep getting worse. And honestly, if we can grab them between the 8 to 12-year-old range is ideal for me versus waiting until they're like 12 or 13, 14, 15 years old.
And when you go out to the Brian Holden Vision Institute page, that's a free resource, as Jamie mentioned. It is you can look at the bottom of the page and see where they're getting these projections and this data from. It has all of the resources at the bottom. If you want to make a really powerful statement, you could say that this child could potentially be a -6 and 3/4, -6.76 down at the bottom there by the age of 17 if myopia control isn't implemented. So you could show the parent by the age of 17, this could be what their world looks like. And of course, these are projections, so you have to kind of say it lightly. But another thing is the control rate at the top. You can toggle that percentage as well. So you can change that if you feel that you want to do it closer to 50%. This is a question that I get all the time as well. I wear contact lenses. Why is this so expensive compared to just, vision correction? Um, what do you usually tell patients, Jamie?
Well, it depends on especially what modality that we're doing too. And we'll talk about fees at the end and how we kind of come to that number. But, it's a customized treatment for your patient, especially if you're doing orthokeratology. It's a customized lens that they make for your child. We're going to be seeing them for more visits throughout the year versus just, I'm going to grab a lens off the shelf and you order the annual supply and I see you a year from now. So a lot of it is just the time that they have to be in the office with me, the face-to-face time. And then I also talk about too that, subsequent years, it is going to be a lower cost because you're not going to be seeing me as much. I usually make a joke, like as much as I know how much you love coming in here, you'll probably be happy when you graduate a little bit and don't have to come visit us as often when you get more stabilized. So I usually just say it's like an all-inclusive price and it includes all your services and your lenses included together instead of it just being a normal lens. But honestly, like with the cost of dailies right now, and especially daily multifocals, daily torics, like it's really not that much more. And it's still like
Mhm.
correcting their vision and it's also making it a therapy. So it's making it so that their eyes aren't continuing to get worse.
Yeah. And that's what I like to emphasize is, well, not only are these contact lenses correcting your child's vision, but it's also a therapeutic intervention, as opposed to just simply allowing them to see. And then
Hmm.
in the case of orthokeratology, it's like, well, we're designing a custom lens for your child. We can't just go pick up these lenses off a shelf somewhere. We're looking at
Hmm.
the shape of their eye and we're designing a lens that's just for them. This is always the next question that I
Hmm.
get after the expense talk.
Right. Like, how long does this need to happen? I say something pretty
Mhm.
similar too. And I usually say, like, a lot of the research now or the research we have in the past was always like up till age like 17, they should stop growing. But I usually say, things are changing in the world now, right? Our kids are kind of like the test subjects for the future, unfortunately. We do know that kids are on
Mhm.
screens longer. They're going to further education longer. They're going to college more, grad school. So I usually say, like, we kind of get to a point once they graduate high school and we decide if how they're doing, if they want to transition to a more traditional style lens, if they're doing ortho-K. Honestly, a lot of my kids like to wear those throughout college. But I
Mhm.
also kind of compare it to if I had a patient wanting to get LASIK. I usually tell them that they need to wait until they're done with further education because I have seen those changes still happen even though they're like 20, 21, 22 years old. So that's kind of the comparison I make. But I also kind of leave room for this is the current research I have now. I don't know what it's going to say 10 years from now when your kid is 18. And so I say, this is
Mhm.
my recommendation now, but if things change and it will update you every single year, that if I have new information, then I might have to, update this. And they understand that like science and medicine is always changing. So I don't want to promise when they're 8 years old that they'll be done by 18. Who knows? Like there could
Right.
be 10 years of new research that we'll be exposed to, and we might have to change what our recommendations are.
Mhm. Yeah, and a comment study shows us on from that study anyways when children tended to stabilize. So about 77% by the age of 18 and then 96% by the age of 24.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that Dr. Mark Bullimore had a paper that looked at adult myopia progression. And we see that every day, right? That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
the bread and butter of a lot of our practices are progressing myopes. But what I really like to talk to parents about is your child probably still is going to progress as they get older, especially if they're going to college and graduate school and doing a lot of near work. But if we can slow it down when it's the most progressive at a young age where we're having these rapid changes, then that's going to protect us in the long term. And, then it may not be as big of a deal when they're older. So let's go into a little bit of marketing. I know, Jamie, when we were building this presentation together, we were kind of talking about what has worked best for both of us in terms of marketing. And you said I've really built it just from a large majority from word of mouth, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, that's where most of my marketing for my entire cold start really was. I haven't like invested on a lot of like Google ads or like SEO. It just honestly wasn't in my budget at the time, as a cold start.
Mhm.
So a lot of it is just word of mouth. Once you fit one child, they end up telling their friends and the other parents on the baseball team and the swim team, and it really just starts to grow from there. And word of mouth, I think, is really really strong. I mean, look at how many people post on like social media or Facebook groups or mom groups, like, hey, who's a good pediatrician for my child, and everyone comments, and that's what they end up going with. So the word
Mhm.
of mouth and like the mom groups, like those are the ones that you don't pay for, but they are the strongest. So they're going to hold the strongest recommendations. I mean, my husband just did it for like a plumber. He posted it on the neighborhood page, and that's who he went with. It wasn't like who sent a flyer to our house. So I think word of mouth is like honestly going to be your strongest way to market.
Right. And what's really cool about orthokeratology is it's a really unique offering to patients. This book, it's a really cool book called Contagious, and it's all about marketing and how word of mouth marketing is just the best type of marketing that you can do, as Jamie said. And they talked about some of the key things that make a product make people want to talk about the particular product. And it was these six things: having social currency, creating effective triggers, generating emotional response. I'm just going to go to this next slide here. I'm not going to read what each of those things are, but as I was reading this book, it's like, holy cow, orthokeratology has all of these things. I mean, it's a unique product. It's, when you talk to parents about it, there's always this wow factor. You mean my child's going to wake
Mm-hmm.
up and be able to see the next morning? And so I love doing soft contact lenses. I love that we have the ability to do atropine, but it just doesn't get talked about like orthokeratology does. And
Mm-hmm.
think a big thing, as Jamie said, with, volleyball teams and kind of these sports groups is the power of social proof.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about just kind of empowering your patients with, hey, you're now going to be able to play tennis without your glasses falling off your face. You're going to be able to swim with, being able to see where the heck you're going. And as you're kind of talking to these patients about what they really enjoy doing now that they're not having to wear glasses, um, they're just like, yeah, this is great. And the parents love it too. Their child is getting to operate how they should without having to look through a pair of glasses on their face. So I have this little video here of this guy. I love this guy. He's so cool.
All right, so
Um,
we have Chase.
He's hilarious. Let me pause it real quick though. So basically, I just asked him, would you mind just recording a video with me on what you really enjoy about wearing orthokeratology? And I really liked his response, so I'm gonna skip to it.
And um, I don't have to worry about like if the football hits me in the face, which has happened over 4 times. Don't have to worry about snapping my glasses. If it, I'm not having to worry about like being careful or running, being afraid that they're gonna fall off. Nothing's gonna like. It's not really gonna break. There's no risk involved in doing anything physical.
So he just really loved that he was able to, play soccer and head the ball without um, the soccer ball smashing his glasses. Um,
It's so
uh,
funny.
Another thing that I just kind of had fun with is I made these little handwritten cards, and this was at my previous private practice that I worked at. Is we just made them little cards, and it was at their 1 month successful follow up. They're not having an emotional breakdown every morning trying to take their lenses out or putting their lenses in at night. They're kind of in a good spot. And we say,
Right.
hey, here's a gift card to go see a movie, go see a 3D movie, and you don't have to put those 3D glasses over your glasses. You get to go see it with your own eyes. And then it kind of encourages them to bring friends with them, and kind of get the conversation going too. Jamie, do you have incentives for patients referring friends to you?
I don't. I just found like personally, I just felt like it was a little bit difficult to like track those things. I know like my previous office had tried it for a little bit and then it got a little sticky when patients were like, well, I referred that family, or no, I referred that family. I think if there was like a really, really good way to implement it, I definitely would consider it. And if your office already has that like set up in general, that would be a really great opportunity to like market to patients within their groups, but you just have to really organize it so that it doesn't end up being like a competition of like who actually referred the family out of like the baseball team, right? Do you
Right.
do like a any kind of a referral bonus at all?
I did initially, and I did away with it afterwards. I just kind of felt weird to have to give it was a financial incentive.
Right.
Um, and so I just really kind of decided I want people to do it because they're really happy with us and want to talk about it versus offering a financial incentive. And that's just what worked for us.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that the book talks about is emotion. And like I said, I really like to talk about the emotional aspect of myopia. Um, and I really like to talk about how their life is a little bit different now that they're in orthokeratology. I see some pretty big changes in children that were orthokeratology where they do seem kind of like a this isn't always the case, but often I'll see that they're kind of like a different little person when they come in. They're maybe a little bit more self-confident. They're excited of all the new things that they're able to do. And there's actually data on this. So this is a paper where I took a direct quote from it, and it said the children who wore lenses were more self-confident. They were more willing to try new things. They were more active and participating in sports and entertainment. And it just overall made them want to spend more time outdoors. And what parent doesn't love that?
Right.
So, a little bit of internal marketing. I think it's important to have myopia management be featured on your website somewhere. So that is a key page in our website. It's also on Jamie's, where she talks about myopia management. There's a page that's specific to Ortho-K as well.
And then we had these little pictures of our, little kiddos that are happy and successful. Mine's like right in the middle there. That she actually came in on her birthday to get like her MySight lenses, which I thought was so cute that she wanted to get them on her birthday so she could wear her glasses like without or didn't have to wear her glasses on her birthday. But the main thing, like my little internal marketing, is just getting this little sign. And it was kind of nice because it actually showed like instead of putting the lenses in front of somebody, it actually shows like what a -6 looks like, what a -2 looks like. And it actually like started a lot of conversations with the grandparents. I had so many grandparents that would come in and they would just say like, oh, I didn't know kids like needed glasses. Like, I don't know, I hear some really out of pocket things. Like, I didn't know that, kids, their vision could get that bad, right? And so I've actually had a lot of grandparents and parents and aunts and uncles, and they say, when should kids get their eyes checked? And I say, and I kind of go over everything, and they didn't know that. And I've had a lot of kids come in just because somebody else in their family sees that sign and brings them in for even just their comp, or it just kind of starts the conversation. It's just an interesting little signage. So you can have that. That was just, from Cooper Vision, but you could make up something on your own too and just have that out in your front optical. And I think a lot of times we think about like kids and marketing directly to a child, but I think we should really be kind of targeting that demographic of like higher myopes, our grandparents, anybody there, and talking about it before their child even comes into your office.
Yeah. Side note, what the heck is in that bag?
Oh, oh my gosh. She like had this little pet thing, a little stuffed animal pet that she like brought in and wanted to have it next to her when she was doing insertion removal training. I don't know, whatever makes them comfortable and safe when they're learning contact lenses is totally fine in my office.
I love that. And other things that you can do, I mean, uh, these companies, Cooper Vision, they or whoever, like Bausch and Lomb, whatever products that you're using, they're going to have beautiful brochures that are created
Mhm.
by marketing teams. So in addition to these banners, you can also have brochures that are just kind of left out in your lobby or in the exam room. And one thing that we did in our practice is we have a screensaver that was like an orthokeratology screensaver. And what's nice about that is, orthokeratology just doesn't have to be for children. It can also be for adults as well. So you can talk a little bit about how, oh yeah, if you're scared to get LASIK, well, there's an option for you available called orthokeratology. Here's a brochure. Why don't you, read a little bit about it? And there was just a lot of conversations that I would have just from people kind of sitting in the exam room, waiting on me and seeing that screensaver there. And you can also, if you wanted to, say that you took your orthokeratology training course, you're ready to get started. Well, you could mine your EMR and you know pick what age you wanted to start with, what their diagnosis is, and just create a list of patients and send out this new technology that your office has. So external marketing, Jamie, when you cold started your practice, did you do a lot of external marketing?
Yeah, well, I did a lot of marketing, like going door to door to especially like ophthalmologists, referral sites. So we that's kind of like the extent of my external marketing. I guess it's kind of like an extension of word of mouth. I didn't do
Mhm.
a lot of, like I said, I didn't do a lot of like SEO or Google or paid things. I did a lot of like visiting offices, talking to pediatricians, and the coordination of care letters. I've just been sending like letters from my exam, but I actually love your example of what you send to pediatricians, especially the one on the right, because it's just really concise. Pediatricians are super busy right now. They have to see so many kids and so many conditions. Instead of just having like a whole printout of the entire exam, it kind of just really gets to like, what's going on, what the patient is seeing. And it also talks about the type of lenses that they're using to slow progression, because a lot of pediatricians don't even know about that. I actually got my own pediatrician to send her daughter in for Ortho-K just because I brought it up during my child's well visit. So like they're not trained on this stuff, right?
Amazing.
They have so many things that they need to learn to care for children from head to toe. There's no way that they're going to know about, myopia management. So I think this is a really great template. If you guys want to take it, steal it. I'm going to implement this instead of sending that lengthy exam. It just kind of gets to the root of the issue there.
Yeah, and I kind of took that from the diabetic updates that we would send to patients, PCPs, and I was like, why do I not do this for myopia? So I feel like it's a really good sneaky way to market to pediatricians. And for probably the first couple of times that I do this, I'll also send a paper. Oh gosh, I wish I would have wrote it down. The American Academy of Ophthalmology had a paper on myopia control that was endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And so I'll send that to them via their fax. They probably hate how much paper I'm wasting, but I found that it was a very good educational resource for those folks that come from their people.
Mhm. Do you
I
want to
personally
jump?
don't.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I
Oh,
was
go
just going to
ahead.
say, I know we only have a couple minutes left. Do you want to jump ahead to pricing? Because I think this is one that everyone wants to get a bit of information on, because I know we only have a couple
Yeah,
minutes left
let's
on
do
our
it.
hour. Yeah. I think this is like the number one question that we get a lot, is like how to set your fees, whether it be insurance versus self-pay. My office accepts insurance. Dr. Srinzi's is a self-pay practice only. So, there's a few different things when you're looking at insurance. Usually what I'm doing is actually, if I am using insurance towards myopia management, I'm only using their contact lens material allowance for the V code. Okay. I'm not using the contact lens fee. I have my own kind of myopia management fee that includes all the visits and the fitting. If you're doing self-pay, you're going to want more of like that global fee that includes your materials, your visits, everything. And there's a couple options. You can always do like a pay per month, a subscription option that has like recurring payments, or maybe offering like a discount to pay everything all up front in a lump fee. So maybe it's like 10% cheaper if they buy everything, pay everything up front, or versus like doing more of a subscription model. Do you want to jump ahead to the next slide
Mhm.
there? And a lot of times insurance gets a little tricky, because that's the number one question that I get is like, does insurance cover this? And I say, well, no, it's just like, just like if they were getting glasses or contact lenses normally, they have their $150 allowance, which we're more than happy to like apply for them. But just like how, it wouldn't cover your supply of like AccuView lenses for your child, it's still, you just get the same allowance no matter what you apply it to. And I just kind of word it that way, and it makes a lot more sense um, for the patient in that regard. So no, it's not something that's like completely covered by insurance at this point. Who knows in the future? Maybe. We never know how the vision plans are going to evolve and change. Um, let's
Mhm.
see. What is next? Yeah, and
So
obviously, yep, go ahead.
if I'm remembering correctly, you said that you typically just use your V code to cover like materials, and
Hmm.
then the rest of it self-pay. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, now I can.
Okay, yep, yeah. I just use the material allowance as all just for the V code. One thing you do have to kind of keep in mind too, if you are doing that for something like Ortho-K, that's considered like a conventional lens. So sometimes some of the vision plans will make you have like a mandatory 10 to 15% write-off along with that. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind if you are taking insurance that you really look at um, your allowances and how they're delegated between disposable and conventional.
Hmm. Wait, so at the previous practice that I worked at was a, like traditional practice where we saw the full gamut of patients. And so what we decided to do to cover our costs is do kind of like a fusion of allowing patients to use their, quote unquote insurance. We call it like a vision discount plan. And
Hmm.
then having a self-pay component too. So they would pay for their exam encounter, the refraction, and then we had a contact lens evaluation fee that was like our higher tiered that we would charge, plus the contribution of their material benefits. But we also had the self pay that we said, this cannot be discounted towards this. Your insurance does not pay for this therapy, so we have the self
Hmm.
pay component to it, but they still were pleased that they were able to use their insurance. And, it just took a little bit of counseling for them to understand
Hmm.
why we had this self pay component to it. So let's get into the numbers here. Um, it's kind of, I think the most challenging part from a practice management standpoint is figuring out what to charge. So
Hmm.
think about what your practice is already doing. Let's say that your gross revenue is 750,000 per year, and the total number of hours that you see a patient, say that you're working 260 days a year, you have 8-hour days. So our gross revenue per hour for this practice would be $360. So that
Hmm.
is a minimum of what you would want to make per hour. So if we think about orthokeratology, for example, you have your initial exam, maybe you're having them come back for a consultation, and then you have a series of follow-ups, however you determine your follow-up schedule to be. Just add up those number of hours and multiply it by the gross revenue per hour that is your minimum. So
Hmm.
in this case, we want to do $780 for the services. And then from there, maybe give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. What if you have not the best case scenario and there are going to be some extra follow-ups? We'll just add those in for some extra time. And then think about your materials. So
Hmm.
say that you're charging $300 a lens for orthokeratology. Well, your minimum fee that you would want to charge for that first year would be around 1,600. But to me, I think, well, that's just kind of my basic gross revenue per hour doing kind of basic things.
Hmm.
I think that orthokeratology is a little bit more of an advanced service. I've invested in more technology, like a topographer. It's taking more of my staff time in terms of education, insertion and removal, just continually talking to parents throughout this process. So I think that I would want to make my prices a little bit higher.
Yeah, and I think this is a
So,
great way to look at it too, because I have a lot of my colleagues that, you think about like, oh yes, I got, I paid this like huge fee all up front, and then all of a sudden you have all these follow-up visits, right? And I just had my
mhm,
friend last week who was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have like five follow-ups, taking up my whole Friday schedule, and like you're actually not, generating revenue as if you were just seeing a routine patient. And so you have to make it worth it for your practice to include all of those like follow-ups within the global fee that makes sense for your practice. So I love the example you had because you can just kind of plug it in for whatever makes sense for your area, your practice, what you would normally see with routine patients. And like you said, and it should be, you should be generating more revenue than just a typical like glasses exam, right? It takes a lot more skill and training and expertise. So I absolutely love
mhm,
that. So that was just my little aside there. And I like how you looked at too with like the orthokeratology versus doing like a soft multifocal lens, for example, like my site in this situation, and kind of how you kind of, it was less follow-ups are involved with my site. But we do also know that the material costs are a little bit higher as well, that you have to
mhm,
consider when you're doing like a disposable lens. So if you look at doing a FDA approved myopia control contact lens, the material cost is going to be a little higher. So sometimes we actually end up charging a little bit more for that type of lens, even though there's less chair time, because you have to look at your material cost to your practice as well. And then
Hmm.
how do you go
Yeah, I
about
agree.
like looking at your like year 2, 3, 4? Because that's usually the next question, right? That I get
Hmm.
from my parents is like, what can I expect for year 2?
Yeah, I think it softens the blow a little bit when you can be like, well, it's going to be less. Don't worry. This first year is just because there's a lot of time that goes into making sure that your child is successful. And then from there, we're just coasting, making some small
Hmm.
adjustments. So my year 2, I just think about how many less visits that I'll have and adjust accordingly. So you can just see how we adjusted the math from being a little over 2 hours to little over 1 hour of time.
Hmm.
So the fee schedule for office time will go down. And if you wanted to further make that not sound so bad, you could offer like a subscription plan for subsequent years where maybe they pay a set amount per month. This is what we do at my office, and we actually offer it from year 1 on. And then to cover my costs, I'll have like a consultation, an exam fee, a consultation fee, and that covers my materials. And then from there, they pay monthly. And, there has been some cases where I've been ghosted because we do in-house financing,
Yeah.
but it's very uncommon that that happens with my myopia population. It's more so with my specialty contact lenses that that happens more so. But I feel like $90 a month sounds a lot better than, $1,000 a year.
Especially if they have more than one child and they have to try to, if all their annual checkups are like on the same month, that starts to really add up if you have 2, 3 kids, to have to prepare for this,
Hmm.
like, fee bomb essentially, in
Yeah.
August or June or July or whatever. You can just kind of space it out throughout the year. And I think that also helps to improve compliance too, that if they're paying every single month, they're more likely to come in for those follow-up visits and come in to replace their lenses because they're already paying for it. Because if they don't come in,
Right.
that money is still getting swiped off of their card. Um,
That's a great point.
yeah.
And so then this is just another way that you could think about your fee schedule if you're just like, I don't even want to look at my gross revenue. I'm not an accountant. Just think about your existing fee schedule. What did you set your existing fees, like your usual and customary for a level 4 exam, and then follow-ups? Then you could just think about it from that perspective, by just using what you already have and adding
Hmm.
it up for how many visits you anticipate you may have for year 1 orthokeratology and then subsequent years.
Hmm. And this is a better way to look at like atropine fee schedule, because then you kind of like compare it to like a medical follow-up. That's the way I kind of came to my number of, how to charge for atropine because you don't have material costs. So it's a good way to kind
Hmm.
of look at it, as if it was like, for example, like a level 3 visit. And that's just the way I set my fees for that.
For sure. Um, and this is what I already talked about, and these are not my fees. These are
Right.
just examples, but this one way that you could, if you wanted to do a subscription model or a continuity of care model, whatever fancy word you want to use that sounds better than subscription. Um, just if you're going to do in-house, just try to cover your costs at the beginning.
Hmm.
So I'm going to go ahead and dive into some questions. All right, Jamie, I'm going to ask you this one. What if patients try Ortho-K for a few months but decide that they don't like it? How do you go about any sort of refund?
Hmm. So I feel like that very, very rarely happens because usually the kids like love it. I've had that happen a couple times. And honestly, at that point, like if I have a warranty, like depend certain lenses from certain manufacturers might have like a 120-day, warranty where you can return or cancel the fit. And I will do that, and then I will just switch them over to like soft multifocal lenses instead. And I just kind of credit them back for that material cost and apply it to soft multifocal lenses for the patient. Or I had one that ended up dropping out and going to atropine. So we just applied that to like update her glasses. So I kind of kept it as like an in-house credit. And then we got her a new pair of glasses and she had to wear glasses full time. Like it rarely happens, but I usually just do something to kind of, make it right for the patient. Um,
Mhm.
so that's what I do.
Oh, this is really good. One of the doctors said in Texas, it's not legal to offer rewards for patients. We have anti-kickback laws. So that's a great point, and that's something to look into look into it so you don't get into trouble. So thank you for saying that.
Right.
And then another comment was, I usually like to compare Ortho-K prices and myopia control management to braces for teeth. Teeth are
Hmm.
expensive, and so are eyes. So we have lots of teeth, but only two eyes. Um, and they don't. Yeah, so I think that's a really good comparison because we know how expensive making a beautiful smile is. If the parents bought a spare pair and never used them throughout the year, do you ever have any pushback from parents with renewing fee if no changes? Do you do spare pairs, Jamie?
Hmm. Well, this is tricky because I'm kind of wishy-washy with this, and I personally need to be better at it. Because then you do run into those situations where it's like, well, I bought this lens like 6 months ago. Like, why do I need to replace both of them? And uh, so usually if you're doing a spare pair, I would recommend doing it at the beginning of the fit and not like, oh, you give them a discount. Because what I've ran into is if I give them a spare pair discount when they break a lens 6 months down the road and I discount that
Hmm.
lens, all of a sudden at the annual, they're like, well, I don't need a new lens because I bought this one and you gave it to them at like 50% discount. And then they just try to like stretch that one for a year and a half. And so it kind of runs into issue. I would say if you do a spare pair, do it like at the beginning of the fit. So that way you're not running into kind of that confusing replacement schedule if they replaced it like 6 to 8 months down the road. I mean, there's some
Hmm.
offices too that just say like this is our fee and it includes like any replacements that you need, and the office just like absorbs it. Um, I don't personally like to do that just because I feel like it takes away value from the lens, and so like if they break or lose it, they're just kind of like, oh, whatever, I can get a new one. That's kind of the what I have found anyways, if you don't put a value on the lens itself. What do you do?
So having the subscription plan, I really don't get into that because it's kind of an exciting time at the beginning of the year or their new their comprehensive exam for the year. Hey, guess what? You get fresh lenses. This is awesome.
Hmm.
Now you get to keep these previous ones as backups because, if you break or lose one of these lenses, um, it'll take a couple of weeks to get a new one to you. So this is great. Let's have a positive moment here.
Right.
So I've kind of gone back and forth and having backups as well. And I just really haven't needed to either because, we've been maybe there's like one change that we'll have to do, and I'll just let them keep their first pair of lenses if as long as it's, treating their health okay. And then they just use that as a backup until they get their new ones shipped to them.
Hmm.
Um, so another question is um, explain what a biometer is and how it would be used to fit and or monitor. So biometry is to look at the length of the eye, and depending on what biometer you decide to purchase, some of them have growth curves integrated in it. So it's a really nice education tool for you to show parents where their child falls on a growth curve, which they're pretty accustomed to doing at their pediatrician's office. So it translates pretty nicely, but instead of
Hmm.
it being a positive thing, being in the higher percentiles, it's actually a negative thing. If you buy a biometer that is not specifically for monitoring myopia progression over time, you can always print out growth curves online. There's a few papers out there that you could just plot where their axial length lies on a growth chart. I did that before my Pentacam now has the myopia software where it's in there, which is nice. But before I was
Hmm.
literally printing out a paper and scanning it into their chart after plotting it. And reprinting it and scanning it. But it was a very good educational tool, and especially with orthokeratology, to be able to see their progression over time is relatively difficult because you're neutralizing their prescription. And biometry does just a beautiful job of objectively showing you their level of control compared to normative data. What do you do, Jamie, since you send it to the you send it down the road to the ophthalmologist? Do you just kind of look at the numbers and educate on the numbers, or do you have
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
visual that you pair it with?
So I just have it like in their chart saved. So I just have it in their chart. So I don't have like a nice, cool, fancy printout, which is like definitely the advantage of having some of the software that's with some of the biometers to like print out and give like a growth chart. So I just note it in their chart and I just discuss it with them. So
Mm-hmm. Ooh, I love this question. How do you respond to parents about continued progression even after administering treatment? Do you address progression before starting treatment? And do you talk about it slowing progression versus halting it completely?
yeah, so I always like you should never promise that it's going to completely stop because we know it's not going to completely stop the progression. So I just say it's going to slow. And so what I say, especially at the initial consultation, is instead of them having a whole diopter jump, like I'd like them to have maybe only a quarter, like a 0.25 jump. Then that would make me really happy. Especially if they went from like a 1.5 to a 3. So, I kind of compare it to instead of 6 steps, I want it to only be like 1 or 2 ideally. But I say, sometimes they'll go through a huge growth spurt and they'll grow like 4 or 5 inches in 1 year. We might have a little bit of progression that way. And there's
Mm-hmm.
also the situation where we might have to add, do combo therapy, atropine plus ortho K if they are progressing. And that's why we do those mid-year checks, right? So that way, if they are progressing, we can either change treatment, do combo treatment. Um, so yeah, I mean, I just had one this week where they progressed like a half, but based on, what they were progressing before, the parent was still happy with that. You just kind of spit it
Mm-hmm.
into the positive of like, they had a little bit of a change, but it was only like 0.5 this year. And like in the past, it was always like 1.5, 2 diopters. So to me, that's a win. And you just have to spin it that way.
Right. Exactly. And it is difficult to know, if you have a new patient, are they not responding to the treatment, or would they have progressed even more if we
Hmm.
weren't in this?
Right.
So I like to tell parents like, hey, we're kind of stopping a moving train here, and
Right.
think about where our vision would be, where we would be if we didn't start this. And if I feel like they're in the non-responder category from just maybe looking at historical data, whether I have that or whether that was sent to me, if they're progressing still the same as what they were before initiating treatment, then I would try something else.
Hmm.
And it depends. Like if I have like a little bit of improvement, but not where I want to be, then consider, combination therapy by doing an optical method like orthokeratology, or a soft contact lens, along with atropine. And you know, there's that would be a whole nother lecture to talk about atropine concentrations. But right now, from the LAMP study, we know that 0.05% tends to be the best concentration right now, because all we have available is compounding pharmacies. Atropine is a very unstable compound, et cetera. So it'll be exciting when the FDA approved ones become available. But for now, that seems to be the best concentration, 0.05, one
Hmm.
drop at night.
Hmm.
Um, so we are due for a short break for about 10 minutes. And then after that, we will get to hear from Dr. Brooke Messer, about a really exciting lens called the Arise lens by Bausch and Lomb, which is a really awesome orthokeratology design. We'll get to hear from patient testimonials, having worn orthokeratology. Then we'll get to hear from Dr. Jason Jedlicka afterwards on orthokeratology advancements and new lens designs. And then after that, we will have a panel discussion at the very end where, if your questions weren't addressed, we can talk about some of those questions, as well as some other, common questions on axial length, corneal changes, all that good stuff. So everybody go fill up their coffee and, stretch some, maybe do some laundry. And we'll see you guys back at 20, let's see. Yeah, 20 after.
With the Arise platform, you can design strikingly precise Ortho-K lenses in just seconds. Today, I'll show you how. The Arise platform streamlines the fitting process and can provide highly accurate lens designs while reducing chair time. Plus, the intelligent, cloud-based platform is easy to use and access, offering end-to-end support from consultants within the platform at any time. You can think of the Arise fitting process in 3 steps: capture, design, and evaluate. Let's look at the first step. First, capture corneal images. Use your topographer to capture the patient's corneal shape. Then, select right and left baseline scans and click Cloud Link. If you're using another topographer, your view may look slightly different, but you will still use Cloud Link. This feature makes it easy for you to select the highest quality maps and seamlessly import them onto the Arise platform. Now, let's get your custom Ortho-K lens design. On the Arise dashboard, click Create Patient. Adding patient data, such as prescription and age, will help the platform customize lens recommendations. Then check the box labeled Use as Patient Baseline to confirm which topography will be the baseline map. In just a few clicks, Arise recommends a strikingly precise lens design for each eye, including landing zone, diameter, and optical zone. If you need support, you can request consultation for guidance on any order. You can also provide lab instructions or ask questions about your order. All discussion history is archived in the patient's profile. Click Start New Design to view the current design parameters, review the order, and submit. And that's it. Your Arise lens order is off to the lab. If acceptable, dispense the lenses. If a lens requires adjustments following overnight wear, simply capture overnight maps and upload them through CloudLink, just like before. Select the outcome from the Overnight Outcome Map library that best resembles the patient's overnight map. The Arise platform automatically adjusts parameters based on initial and post-wear maps to generate a new lens order. And there you have it. We hope you find that the Arise system saves you time and reduces guesswork in your Ortho-K practice. If you ever need support, don't hesitate to reach out within the platform.
It's my number one option. They're definitely at the top. Arise changed my life.
In the end, Arise basically changed my life for the better.
Hello, my name is Eli, and I'm 11 years old. I'm definitely a sports kid, an athlete. I love to do sports in all my sports, whether it was, football or baseball. Some of them required a helmet, and I remember having glasses on with a helmet, and that was really hard because it was just really tough having to pry the helmet open. But with the new Ortho-K lenses with our eyes, it allowed me to, to be able to do so much things that I never thought of were possible before. I could see everything clearly with my contacts on, no glasses. It was definitely a huge moment for me because I knew that, I had done it and I didn't need glasses anymore. Waking up and going to school and not having to worry about where I'm sitting in the class or how big the print is on the screen or anything like that. Our eyes has allowed me to see things a lot more clearly. We had a discussion, what would be the first thing you would grab if the house started on fire and you need to grab something? And I said my contact lenses. My Arise lenses is what I would grab. So one of my most important things, Arise lenses have been life-changing for me, and they're incredible, and I recommend them to any other kids out there like me who, just are sick of glasses and want to try out something new.
Hi, my name is Jordan and I'm 14 years old. It was kind of a pain because I was in sports and soccer especially, so I had to always play less than what I could because I always had the handicap of wearing glasses, which I didn't really like. So when I heard that I had the opportunity to use the Arise lenses, I jumped at it because I thought that it would be a really good life-changing thing for me. I first did it in the summer and it was amazing. I was able to try new things, run around. I was able to swim and actually see underwater, and I was able to do all these things without glasses, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I think that the Arise lenses are really cool because instead of it just being a lens that goes over top of my eye or like a soft contact that goes in my eye, it's actually reshaping my eye instead of being something that is just sat in front of my eye. So it kind of literally changes my vision. I'm nearsighted, so it was very different for me when I first saw the world in general without a lens in front of my eyes, because I was actually able to see that trees had leaves on them, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Arise changed my life. I would definitely say to try it out because it was very helpful for me. It has been very helpful for me, and I really like them. And I mean, why not? Because you don't really have anything to lose by trying them out.
Hi, I'm Owen, and I'm 13. I'd usually spend 4 hours on my electronics, and I didn't know what it was like to have a better vision. And I didn't think much of it because I was only about 9 or 8. I play soccer, so I can definitely read the field better, and that just helps my skill improve overall. It's definitely changed my life, and it probably will forever. I think I'm going to stick with these contacts for a lot longer, and I really hope that other people that are struggling with vision know the opportunity that is so easy to take, and it can improve their lives just like mine.
All right, Dr. Jedlicka, you ready? Ready to rock?
Ready.
Well, we are so excited to hear from you. I actually had a couple of people text me and they're like, "Oh, that was my professor. I love him." So
That's very nice.
So yeah. Well, I'll be your host again to help moderate questions. We'll save those questions for the end of the presentation. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce you. Dr. Jedlicka is a professor at Indiana University School of Optometry and director of Cornea and Contact Lens Service. He's a diplomate in the American Academy of Optometry's Cornea, Contact Lens, and Refractive Technologies section, a past president of the Scleral Lens Education Society, and a fellow and board member of the Contact Lens Society of America. I'm sure that you have read multiple of his articles, textbooks, publications out there on all things specialty contact lenses. And today we get to hear his expertise in customization and new lens features of orthokeratology. So here are his financial disclosures, all of which have been mitigated. And I will have you take it from here.
All right, thank you, Ariel. And thank you everybody for being here for this hour of continuing education. Because this is a CE COPE-approved course, I'm not going to be talking about any brand specifically. So you'll have to do a little bit of digging on your own. If you find something here that you like the idea of, you always contact someone down the road. So just to reiterate a little bit of this, and I think to go through this talk, we need a little bit of background. Some of this may be overly basic, but let's talk about it anyway. What is orthokeratology? And it's just the process of altering the corneal curvature to achieve a desired refractive effect using gas permeable contact lenses. And so we're doing all the work on the epithelium and maybe a little bit of the stroma eventually, but this is mainly epithelial movement. And as Dr. Messer and Dr. Kuzner just related, this is not done through physical pressing. I think when we first were doing Ortho-K, long time ago, we were pressing. And I'll show you a picture and talk about that in just a second. But now we realize that's not the best approach. The best approach is to create this push-pull mechanism to reshape. So we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of Ortho-K from the beginning up to now, and then later we'll talk about now into the future. So let's lay the framework for all of this. I've got a patient who's 70 some years old who I see every year for his annual eye exams, and he still does daytime Ortho-K, and he's been doing it for 50 plus years. And he was a -7 when he started, way before my time. And he basically just did this through use of flat base curve GP lenses. And so his lens looks kind of like this. This is not his eye, but this is a picture that looks very similar to what his lens fit is. And it's just a high riding small lens, and he wears it all day. And you'd say, well, what's the point then? Why do that? Well, because when he takes the lens out at the end of the day, he can see. And he's a -7. So he loves being able to wake up in the middle of the night or wake up in the morning and just be able to see. And he can. And so this is where we started. Ortho-K was just the flattening of the cornea through progressively flattening base curve lenses to achieve a refractive outcome. And this was a form of myopia correction in adults only. Fast forward early 2000s, and early Ortho-K would have been back in the 1970s, let's say 1980s, 90s. And then fast forward to late 90s, early 2000s, and all of a sudden we're starting to get lenses that have reverse geometry curves in them. And this allowed for what we call accelerated orthokeratology, where you could achieve potentially a desired outcome within a lens or maybe two, whereas the old style might take 4 or 5 different progressively flattening lenses. So again, it became easier to prescribe, easier to achieve better, faster outcomes. And on top of that, we add in around that same time some high and hyper decay materials, which allowed us to then transition this to not a daytime wear. Part of the reason for daytime wear was oxygen permeability and corneal edema. And so by getting some high and hyper decay materials, we were able to sleep in our lenses and enjoy the benefit of Ortho-K much more of our waking hours in our daytime. So instead of having the lens in at the day and having an hour or two at night and an hour in the morning, maybe with good vision, we have it the other way around. We have the good vision all day long. So that really was attributed again to the new materials. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the parts of a modern ortho-K lens. There is a base curve in the center, obviously, and that base curve is what determines the correction for our patient. Has nothing to do with the fit as opposed to pretty much every other corneal GP lens where the base curve is vital to the fit. The base curve in an ortho-K lens has zero to do with the fit and has everything to do with the desired visual outcome we're shooting for. And therefore, we don't adjust it to make the fit better when we need to. The second zone here, which you see in the yellow, is our return zone, which really acts as a bridge between the end of our base curve, which hovers out in space above our cornea, and our alignment zone, which is going to provide the centration and fit of our lens entirely. And that return zone has got to bridge between the two zones, and such that we can have the base curve that we want for proper correction, and then also achieve the alignment we need for proper centration and for the function of the push-pull effect of ortho-K to move that epithelium around. And so our return zone, historically was always spherical, but in, the last 10, 15 years, we're increasingly adding toricity to our return zone because we want to bridge that lens right down to the internal edge of our alignment zone all the way around to get that proper centration. So we're adding toricity, we're adding quadrant-specific return zones. We can even do free-form return zones to allow for better approach as we start our alignment zone. And then our alignment zone needs to be as complete and full, as beautiful as you can see in this picture, where that dark ring of contact between the eye and the lens is full and even 360 degrees. Now you'll look at that outer edge and say, it's dark in the middle too. But in a perfect world, we don't really want to touch that central cornea. We really want to hover like 1 micron above it or 2 microns above it or some very small amount, but not an area of contact. Again, as we've already mentioned, this really occurs through not physical pushing of epithelium, but more of a push-pull effect where you have areas of suctioning, and the suctioning effect pulls epithelium into the areas where there's more space. So it will draw epithelium from the center of the cornea peripherally. It would also draw peripheral epithelium into the mid-periphery in the area where we have that space. This is done again through fluid forces. And in order to achieve this proper fluid force function of an ortho-K lens, we've got to have full alignment in the periphery. We cannot have areas where we have a disruption of the fluid forces by having a space or a gap on our alignment zone. So that's a really critical aspect of modern ortho-K, is to get that full mid-peripheral contact area in the alignment zone. Okay, again, modern ortho-K, historical design parameters. When I first started fitting ortho-K 20 some years ago, most of our lenses were in the 10 to 10.6 millimeter diameter range. And again, that was a little bit on the availability of materials. And it was a little bit on our history that we just weren't used to fitting big lenses on the cornea that often. And so 10 to 10.6 seemed big. But you can see by the picture that the lens, there's still a lot of room on this eye for the lens to be larger. And again, our initial lens designs, a lot of them were in the 6 millimeter range, kind of standard 6 millimeter optic zones. And they were, again, mostly all spherical curves, and our alignment zones weren't that wide. Okay, a lot of times that area of peripheral alignment was only maybe a millimeter wide, 1.5 millimeters at the most, and that created some challenges for us as we were trying to fit, especially as we moved into fitting children, because their lids were tight and they would manipulate those lenses easily through just the pressures of their lid. And so to improve centration and therefore improve our treatment, we needed to widen out the alignment zones. And so that's kind of where we've evolved to with lens diameter. And so nowadays we're using a lot of we call full corneal designs to provide better centration. This gives us more area for alignment in the peripheral or mid-peripheral part of our lens. It's going to give us, again, better centration, and a lot of people have their own way of doing it. I have a formula that I determine the diameter I'm going to fit by measuring the patient's HVID and then subtracting a known amount. So it might be like 0.6 millimeters. So if the patient's HVID is 12, I'm going to fit him in an 11.4 lens, for example. And that number can be whatever you think is appropriate and comfortable, but that's kind of where we're at now, is to have a larger diameters in general. All right, so moving ahead a few years into the 2004-2005 range, another thing that changed the way we do Ortho-K and the concept was some publications which demonstrate a reduction in the progression of myopia in children using Ortho-K for vision correction. So this was a whole different aspect, because prior to that, Ortho-K was adults only and it was vision correction only. And so when some of these early designs were out, there just wasn't a lot of utilization because there weren't that many adults who wanted this for vision correction, to be honest. And at this point in time, around prior to this, again, laser vision correction was just kicking in, and a lot of people were like, why would I want to do Ortho-K when I can just do laser vision correction? But the concept changes everything once we have this concept that myopia can be slowed or reduced in progression because of the Ortho-K. And that's, again, because of the peripheral defocus. And I would say that what we've seen in the last few years as more publications have come out talking about this defocus is it doesn't necessarily have to even be plus defocus. It just has to be confusion. So our goal with Ortho-K or any other type of myopia controlling lens is to create confusion in the visual system outside of the central vision. And the closer to the central vision and the more dramatic, the better. So what we have moved forward now into current thinking on our modern lens designs is we are using smaller and smaller optic zones, because the people mainly using Ortho-K these days are children, and that Ortho-K works better for myopia reduction or slowing the progression when we've got the area of confusion, of blur, of closer into the visual center. So we're seeing lens designs now. We're moving from 6 mm to 5.5, or even 5 mm. Maybe we'll even go smaller before we're done. But you can see some different examples here. We've got some different optic zone sizes, and you can, and the benefit of that too is, on top of getting better myopia management, again, it's giving us more area for alignment in the periphery. So, and children are the ones where we have the most difficulty with lens centration a lot of times, again, because of their tight lids. And so going to a smaller optic zone, going to a little larger lens design, all these things are allowing us to get more alignment in the mid periphery and better fits. And this is just an example of the picture on the left with a larger optic zone. And you can see the larger treatment area. You can see where that ring of fluorescein is relative to the center. And then below that is the topography that we'll see from that. The picture on the right shows a smaller optic zone, and it pulls in the area of confusion, maybe even intensifies a little bit. And so our patients end up with better myopia control or management because we've gone to a smaller optic zone. So let's talk about the evolution of lens design when it comes to toricity and quadrant specific reverse zones. Again, most early designs going back to the early 2000s were generally all spherical. And what happens is, again, if we're going to get proper, back when we thought that Ortho-K was mainly a physical push, it was maybe less critical. But when we move to fast forward to the idea that Ortho-K really should be a process of creating a lens that almost seals down on the peripheral cornea and allows this push-pull fluid dynamic forces to work to move the epithelium from the areas of less clearance into areas of more clearance. We've got to make sure that we get that lens to have that full area of alignment. And most corneas, or a lot of corneas, have some toricity. And when we've got a toric cornea and we have a spherical lens on it, there's no way that we can create a lens that will have full alignment in the periphery. And so we look now at, if we're doing lens designs where we're doing the design ourselves, using a fitting set or empirically, etc., the magic number historically in the last few years has been to look at our 8 mm cord. 8 mm being on a standard Ortho-K lens, if you figure a 6 mm optic zone, add a millimeter on each side for the return zone, you're looking at about 8 mm is the point at which our return zone first touches down on the corneal surface. So we look at that cord diameter, And if we're at maybe 30 microns of toricity or more at that point, then we definitely need a toric return zone, if not a toric alignment zone as well. And when we have this situation where we don't have this full alignment because our patient's cornea is toric, as you see in the picture on the left, we get this area typically inferiorly because of the way the lens fits and the way the lid interacts with it, etc. The lens will tilt and tip up under the upper lid. It will lift off inferiorly, and we'll get this area of communication of the fluorescein or the tear layer between the outside of the lens and all the way up into the return zone. When we have this, like the picture shows where the arrow in white is pointing, we are going to really struggle to get proper correction, and most likely our patient's going to get astigmatic correction, if anything else. So again, what we've done is we've started adding toricity to our lens. You can see again, the picture on the left is a spherical lens on a toric eye. We simply add toricity to the return zone and then into the alignment zone, and we'll end up with a much better area of full contact between our alignment zone and our peripheral cornea, like you see on the right. How much do you put in? That's going to come down to your topography typically. You don't have to nail it per se. You don't have to get it exactly right. I'd say you need to be within 15 or 20 microns of the actual toricity of the cornea in what you have in your lens. And again, that's going to occur, it's going to occur mainly in the return zone, and it may occur slightly a little bit in the alignment zone as well. So here's just a quick example of a patient. This is a corneal topography. This is an elevation topography, which if you have a topographer, you have the ability to look at your patient's eye in elevation topography. As you look over where the yellow star is, it says the sagittal height difference at 8 millimeters is 68 microns. So this is a patient that really could use a toric lens, if not a quadrant specific. And again, looking for a quadrant specific alternative, you can simply use your cursor in your topography like this and go to that 8 millimeter cord and find out the exact elevation in each of the 4 quadrants. And if it's significant enough, again, you should be able to go to a quadrant specific with some modern software. But in this case, we just did a straightforward toric lens. You can see the parameters there. Again, the eye shows 68 millimeter or 68 microns of toricity at the 8 millimeter cord. We added 50 to the lens at that point, and then another 12 and a half beyond that. So we've got about 60 some microns of toricity added to our lens when we order it. And this is what it looks like on the eye. And again, you can see that it looks pretty good. We've got that full ring of alignment. It looks even, it looks symmetric. Is it perfect? Maybe not perfect, but it's probably, again, good enough in that it doesn't look like we've got a toric cornea with a spherical lens on it. It looks like the lens matches our corneal shape pretty nicely. And so we take a look, we have the patient wear the lens overnight, and we see it the next day. Our lens is centering quite well and sitting in a proper place, and most of the astigmatism already has been treated away. So again, the idea of adding toricity to Ortho-K lens, if you're not doing it at least probably 40 to 50% of the time, you're probably missing out. A quick rule, if you don't have a way to measure the elevation difference in your corneas for whatever reason, if you don't have a topography or whatnot, a general rule of thumb is about 3/4 to 1 diopter of corneal astigmatism equals about 30 microns. So if your patient that you're fitting has a prescription with, let's say, a 3/4 or a diopter and a quarter of astigmatism or more, you're going to need to add toricity to that lens in order to get a proper fit. And again, that toricity is going to be placed not just in the area of alignment. It's got to be placed at mostly actually in the return zone, because if we put it all in the alignment zone, what's going to happen is we're going to have good wide alignment in our flat meridian, and we'll have alignment in our steep meridian, but only out towards the edge of our alignment zone. We're going to have a large toric looking treatment zone, and that's not what we want. So again, in this case, we're putting the toricity mostly in the return zone, so that at the end of that return zone, where that stops and transitions to alignment, we are contacting the cornea evenly 360 degrees in that location. Again, it is easier to do this with design software, because your design software will know that core diameter where your lens is going to touch down, and it will know from your topography exactly the amount of elevation difference in each meridian or even in each quadrant. As we move to smaller and smaller optic zones for myopia management, this magic number of our 8 millimeter chord diameter might change. If you do know the diameter of your optic zone and the return zones on your lens design, that would be the chord diameter you want to look at. It could be 7, for example, could even be 6.5. But as a rule of thumb, just for a magic number to keep in mind, I would say choose 8 millimeters as your guideline for where you're looking for toricity in the cornea. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of fitting techniques. There was a time, long time ago, when Ortho-K was brand new. We were using fitting sets and or dispensing systems. The systems meaning we literally had a set of 100+ lenses, and a patient could come in and we would put the lens on, and if it worked, they would go home with it. That was expensive, and fitting sets are a pain to clean and disinfect and turn over all the time. And so what we did was we moved, more and more people moved into empirical fitting. And initial empirical fits were pretty successful in using Ks and Rx to determine your initial lens point. Modern approach to empirical fitting would incorporate also, though, HVID as well as corneal eccentricity to get better outcomes with first initial lenses. And now really we're moving into more and more topography-based designs, as Dr. Messer mentioned in her previous talk about a software and a lens design. More and more topography-based designs are going to give you better outcomes with less orders and less visits, which everybody loves. And I just feel like, again, if you've got a topographer nowadays and you've got the ability to put a topo-based design software on the computer there, or a cloud-based one, which is great too, even better, because then it allows you a lot more flexibility where you do your designing, that is really the way to go to get the best outcomes. As was already mentioned too earlier today, if you've been with us the whole day, pre-fit is absolutely critical if you want to get a good outcome, especially if you're using software based off your topography. That your topography has to be ideal. It has to be as good as it can possibly be. If your topography is wrong, if it's got bad data, your lens will have a bad fit. It's 100% guaranteed. So the better you get your map, the more accurate your map is, the more likely you are to get a better fit. The other thing is that once you've put that patient Ortho-K lens and they've worn them for however long, you're never going to get a chance to go back and get baseline corneal map data again, unless you wash them out. And that could be washing them out for weeks or months, and nobody loves that. So it is critical. I think I heard Dr. Kuzner mention earlier that you've got to get your technician, or yourself if you're taking it, to get good data, and there are criteria for that you can explain to them, coverage, etc. If you have axial length, again, get it before you begin. Get it again after you do anything different. So if you start a child on atropine, you should get another axial length measurement and reestablish that this is my axial length now on atropine. If you start Ortho-K lenses, you should remeasure axial length after you start Ortho-K lenses for a week or a month and say, this is now my axial length on Ortho-K lenses. Because there can be differences. And so get good maps, get good axial length measurements, take the time to repeat the testing prior to starting the process. It's really important. Get maximal coverage. The point being is that this area on this map particularly that's got black dots is not real data. That is artificial data. It's extrapolated, and you might make a lens based off that and it could be completely wrong. This is the actual data you've measured. That's all. And so to base a lens off of this little bit of data is really not necessarily very effective. We can also get bad quality maps. I mean, the picture on the left looks like we're getting some of the cornea, but really the picture on the right shows there's very little true measured data here that's accurate. And you don't want to use this as your baseline map, not only because it's going to give you bad data for lens design, but it's also going to be a bad reference for future maps for how am I doing with my treatment. So again, modern Ortho-K fitting, I think if you are in a position where you don't do this, but you want to get going with it and you don't have a topographer, I think you can live without it. I'm not advocating that, but you could. If you have a keratometer and you're good with your retinoscope and things like that, for basic corneas, mild to moderate RXs, again, someone asked what's the ideal sweet spot. I think if you're starting off and you're brand new at it, I'd try to make my first dozen patients all between like -150 and -4. That's probably your sweet spot for success. You can still do empirical fitting. We still do some of that in our clinic using K's, HVID, RX, and eccentricity values. And, we still use topography, but we'll often order our lenses with that data. Again, if you have access to software, it's simple. You don't have to search for that data on your map. You just simply go into the software and you put in the patient's prescription and you let the software do all the work. And then it automatically, you just hit order and it shoots it off to the lab. And there are more and more systems available for doing this. The nice part of doing a topography-based software is for things like toricity. Okay, the software is going to put the toricity in the exact right spot, and if you tweak the optic zone a little bit, the instrument knows that, and it's going to move the toricity to where it needs to be based upon the size of the treatment zone that you've got going on there. So the software is lovely in that it can put the prescription, it can put everything in the right place. You do have option again with some of these programs to do quadrant specific designs. You can even do freeform designs on patients that are particularly difficult to work with. Again, within the system, you can manipulate things like if you do fit a lens and you've got some issues with it after dispensing for whatever reason, because again, a corneal topography doesn't take into account the patient's eyelids. It doesn't take into account things like their tear layer. And so you may put a lens on the eye and it may seem like it's a good topography and a good fit. But once the patient wears it, we've got issues. So within these software programs, again, Dr. Messer mentioned one earlier and how you manipulate that. This is a different one. You can change things like the alignment zone angle, the return zone angle, the base curve, the optic zone diameter, simply with a click of a mouse button and determine how much you want to change it. Again, there are some really sophisticated programs out there that can really be fun to use and achieve wonderful outcomes where you can even go into quadrant specific. I've got a few patients where their cornea was just funky enough that with a toric design, the lens would decenter temporally or nasally a little bit. And flipping those folks into a freeform or even just a quad design can make the difference in pulling that lens in a slightly better centered position. So from here, before we go into the future, I just want to have a couple cases that we could talk through and how we can take on some pretty challenging patients sometimes by using some of the tools that we have in our toolbox now for Ortho-K. And I just want to go back and re-mention this because I don't think you can say this enough, that success in fitting an Ortho-K lens is absolutely dependent upon centration and the complete peripheral corneal alignment. And so again, the picture on the far left is destined for trouble. This lens might work okay on some patients if they have a really simple prescription, but it's not going to work on everybody. And it's only going to really truly work if you've fitted the lens so flat that you're actually physically mashing down the epithelium. And that's not our goal. That's not a healthy way to do Ortho-K. The picture on the center and on the right show situations where, again, we've got full mid-peripheral contact between the alignment zone and the cornea. And this should be our desire, is to have this kind of a fit. The picture in the center, you can see has a little larger treatment zone, and it has a little narrower alignment zone. And that might work for some patients. And if so, that's great. That's really all you need. But again, as you work with children in particular, their lids can be tight. And so sometimes even a lens that looks like that when you look at it on the eye won't look like or won't provide the treatment you're looking for. It's important when you assess an Ortho-K fit that you don't put too much credence on the fluorescein pattern. Ultimately, what matters is the topography that you see after the lens has been worn. A really nice looking fluorescein map or fluorescein picture, fluorescein pattern I'm trying to get out, on a cornea or on a lens in the cornea may not always indicate the best possible fit. And sometimes what looks like less than ideal fluorescein pattern can actually work out quite well when we look at our maps. The picture on the right has a little smaller optic zone, a little wider alignment zone, and may center better, especially on an eye that's got tight lids and wants to push that lens around. So again, how do we get that beautiful alignment? Most of the time, if our cornea is perfectly spherical or has under 30 microns of toricity built in, it's going to be achievable with pretty much any design, any lens. When we start to get into situations like this, where we've got increasing sag differential from the flat meridian to the steep meridian, we've got to take that into account and build that into our lens. And here's a case where you would look at this and say, wow, this is not the kind of patient I want to fit in Ortho-K lenses. Moderate to higher myope with a lot of cylinder. It is pretty corneal. And the Ks are pretty flat on top of it. I mean, look at the K readings. We've got 39 by 40, 250 something, or 42. So we're talking a fairly flat cornea, a fairly high prescription, and highly toric at that. And you can see by the elevation maps, again, we've got this high difference in elevation. What's going to happen if you put a spherical lens on these eyes, in either of these eyes, is the lens is going to rock either up or down across that flattened, elevated horizontal meridian. The lens is either going to ride high or it's going to ride low, but it absolutely cannot ride in the center. It's just not possible. So you're going to end up with a decentered lens up or down and a suboptimal outcome. But when we take this kind of an eye and we put it into software that can determine the elevation differences between the two meridians at the critical point where that return zone drops into the alignment zone, and then we can create a really beautiful looking fit. We can take a patient like this who's got 5.5 diopters of minus in one meridian and 8 diopters in the other. 8 diopters is a lot of minus for that steep meridian to correct. And it's going to create issues with the fit. It's going to create typically air bubbles in our return zone unless we adjust our optic zone size small enough to keep the air bubbles out. A rule of thumb, again, is about 70 microns. You can see if you look in the middle of our map, just to the left, it says tear film 70 microns. This is a 70 micron scale, and you can see that in our one meridian, we're right at 70. So we're pushing the limits of what we can do already with this. In order to keep that bubble out, we can always make our optic zone a little bit smaller. And this right now, we're already in a 5.5 millimeter optic zone because, again, of the prescription in this patient's eye. When we do put the lens on the eye, you can see the top picture on the right is the right eye, bottom picture is the left, and our video, of course, is the right eye. At initial dispensing, I mean, they look beautiful. You would never guess that eye has 2.5 diopters of cylinder in it. The lens generally looks like an ideal fit throughout the alignment zone 360 degrees. So again, this is the result of using a software, and this is kind of where we're at and where we're going to continue to go with modern Ortho-K fitting, especially for more complex patients like this one. And we can look at their 1 month post fitting on the right eye. The upper right picture there shows you the differential. The upper left shows you the map at the follow-up. The lens is centering well. The lens is providing good correction. And so we've got a positive outcome, 20/25 plus 2. Again, with an eye with that much cylinder, I'm pretty happy with that. The left eye looks pretty much the same. Again, a nice centered treatment and one that's giving us good correction, a small treatment zone as well. We knew that because we had a 5.5 optic zone, but again, the patient's seeing 20/20 minus 1. If this is a child, that vision and that size of a treatment zone are just fine. Most of them are not driving at night. As our patients get older, sometimes we need to adjust their fit a little bit to accommodate for night vision, etc. Excuse me. One of the things that we can do and when we tackle challenges, a lot of our patients can have higher amounts of astigmatism. And in the past, we might have looked at them and said, you're just not a good candidate for Ortho-K. And move on. But as you get more adept at doing Ortho-K, as you get more skilled, and as you want to tackle more challenges, one of the things you can do with astigmatic patients is to incorporate toricity into the base curve. And now that's not toricity that you would normally prescribe. This is Trulicity that goes in the opposite direction. So let's think about this for just a second. We've got a highly toric cornea like the patient we just covered in our last example. And we fitted them with a really nice customized lens using some software, and we've got a really nice fit. And yet the patient comes back after a few weeks or a month and they're 20, 30-ish, let's say, and you're still picking up $1.50 a sil in their prescription. So the lenses are working. They've reshaped away maybe half of their cylinder, but it's not getting rid of the last little bit. What you have to remember is that by increasing the Jessen factor being the amount of overcorrection we're putting into our lens, right? So if our patient is a -2 and their Ks are 42, our outcome we want is to reshape them to a 40, but usually we'll fit them with a base curve that's flatter than 40, like 39.5 or 30 or 39 or 39.5. And that's because we know that we've got to overdo it a little bit. All right. So if you think about that astigmatic patient and you've put a spherical base curve on them with toric return zone, toric alignment, and you've got a beautiful fit, and yet you're not reshaping away all of their astigmatism. The way to do that is to pull down the Jessen factor in the horizontal meridian and push it up in the vertical or the steep meridian in this case. And what we end up with is a fluorescein pattern. It kind of looks like the picture on the right, where you can see that we're almost on K in our flat meridian, but we're significantly flatter in our vertical. And so what this is going to do is it's going to selectively push more correction, more epithelium into the vertical meridian. And so we reshape in an asymmetric way. Again, this is not like putting Trulicity like you'd put in a contact lens normally to correct a toric eye, where the lens matches the corneal shape. This is actually putting it in the lens in the opposite direction. So instead of having a steeper meridian, our steeper meridian in this lens goes in the flatter meridian, and the flatter axis of our lens goes in the steeper meridian of the eye. And this is something, again, that you can do using the software programs that are out there. You can also talk to your lab and see if this is something they can do for you. I'm not sure if every lens can have an opposite toric base curve. But again, this is a patient who I fitted years ago. She had about a 325 cornea and refraction. You might say, why would you fit someone with that prescription in Ortho-K? Truth is, she has severe dry eyes, couldn't tolerate any soft lens out there. Even tried putting her in scleral lenses, and she couldn't tolerate them for dryness. So in her case, we fitted her with Ortho-K lenses, and we did pretty well. We reduced her cylinder to about 150. But by putting on a reverse toric base curve, we were able to push her down to less than a diopter cylinder, so that she had about half to 3/4 of a diopter residual in her refractive area, which for her was quite tolerable, and got a post-fit VA of 20/20 minus. So let's talk then now about where we're at now, but looking into the future. So there's been some buzz in the last few years about, that if we get what we really want to control myopia is we really want to have this area of confusion, this blur area, as close to the visual axis as possible. And so maybe we don't want a perfectly centered lens. Maybe these pictures on the left actually give us better outcomes. Maybe we should strive for a less than optimal fit. Maybe we should strive for decentering our treatment a little bit for the purposes of reducing myopia. And to that, I would say that if that's my eye, I don't want that kind of vision. Our patients, our children that we put in these lenses may not complain to us, but they've got doubling and ghosting of their vision when we have this kind of an outcome. And I think having this kind of an outcome really, we're resigning ourselves to saying, I can't do any better. And I think the reality is we can do better. And so what we can do is we can use all the tools in our toolbox, and that is the toricity or the quadrant specific nature of our lenses, our free-form lenses, for example. We can adjust our optic zones, and we can create lenses like the pictures on the right, which have that area of red, that area of blur, the confusion, really close to the visual axis, and yet the visual axis itself is pristinely clean and gives us the best possible distance vision. So again, I will say that the evolution in thinking for me has gone from we want a perfectly centered lens to, well, now maybe it's okay to have a lens that doesn't center very well. So our treatment, so our red ring, if you will, is in the pupil, in the visual axis, even close to. And again, I would disagree with that. I would say that if the patient's super happy and you can't do any better, I guess you can live with it. But to me, I would strive to improve that and to create outcomes more like the pictures on the right, again, which gives us probably a better quality of vision and the same or better functional control of their myopia. There's also been a publication that came out a few years ago, or a year or two ago, that talked about fitting patients with flatter or increased compression factor or a higher Jessen factor, I guess would be another way to put it. Basically, taking that patient who would be a 3 diopter myope with a corneal curvature of 43, where our goal would be to achieve a 40 diopter corneal shape when we're done. And instead of fitting them with a Jessen factor of a half diopter or a 3950 base curve or a 1 diopter, a 39 base curve, we're fitting them in 175 flatter than K. So we're fitting that patient in not a 40, but a 3825 base curve. In other words, what we're doing is we're overcorrecting our patients in theory by a diopter to a diopter and a half and leaving them with a +1 or 1.5 prescription in both eyes. The finding is that did a better job of slowing axial elongation, which is great if our goal is myopia control. But at what cost do we control myopia when our patients walk around overcorrected, hyperopic all day? Aren't there negatives to that? That's just something to consider. So the question again is, can we do better? And so, there are better ways theoretically to build in more defocus in that red ring. If you think about it, and this is particularly pertinent to our lower prescription patients, because our higher prescription patients already have a pretty high area of confusion in that ring. They've got a lot of depth to the return zone because of their high prescription. And what you'll find is that your patients who are 5 diopter myopes who are in Ortho-K do wonderful in terms of the slowing or stopping their progression of myopia. It's the 1 diopter myopes that don't seem to do as well. They seem to go merrily on their way, progressing every year. And you think, why is the 1 diopter myope progressing and my 5 diopter myopes are stable? And again, a lot of times that is because the higher myopes have a denser area of plus in that blur. That red ring is much stronger, creates much more confusion and defocus to the eye, so it controls their myopia better. And so the idea of putting in a higher Jessen factor, like the last article just talked about, drives more plus into that intermediate ring, the return zone, and so that creates more defocus and more blur, which is great for slowing myopia. But again, it overcorrects our patients, and I'm not a fan of overcorrecting my patient if I don't have to. And so the question then becomes, is there a better way? Is there a way to drive more red, if you will, into our ring without overcorrecting our patient? One way we can do that is by adding asphericity to our base curve. So we can create an aspheric base curve, and that will drive up a higher degree of space in our return zone for more epithelial migration. And that's one way to do it. Now, that still does slightly overcorrect our patient because we're creating a increased amount of correction as we move away from the visual axis, but it's still a better option than a spherical overcorrection of 2 diopters. Another way to consider that is, or to consider moving forward in this concept of doing a better job with driving red into our mid ring without overcorrecting our patient, is to move into multi-zone lenses so that I can create a base curve, which is, let's say, 4 millimeters, that is spherical and is correct for my patient. And then at that 4 millimeter, I can start to increase my lift rather than decrease it like a return zone normally does, and then bring it back down again after I peaked out my red ring for maximal power. And so again, the picture on the right shows a lens for a patient with a -1 prescription with a pretty dense return zone, because this lens has gone not just from base curve to return zone, but base curve to a flatter curve and then the return zone. And that's something that can be done. And beyond that, again, we can create multiple zones of various amounts of power in our patients' eyes, in our patients' corneas, by doing different things with our Ortho-K lenses. The problem we run into is that these lenses are not FDA approved. These lenses require multiple zones and many curves, and so this is off-label. This is not approved. This is something that, if is going to happen, is going to require somebody going through and redoing their FDA approval for Ortho-K to allow more than 4 or 5 zones or 4 or 5 curves. It's going to be something in the 7 to 8 curve zone or 7 to 8 curve lens design in order to achieve these kind of effects. But the excitement about this is to, again, drive more myopia control. So as Dr. Kuzner mentioned before when we were talking, that she's not a great fan of Ortho-K on that low myop, and I'm not either. Like the minus 50 myop, I'd rather put them on atropine than Ortho-K. The one diopter myop, I don't get excited about Ortho-K for them, again, because of this very reason, that the myopia control benefit is less. But if we can create lenses for that one diopter myope that have as much reverse curve red ring effect as a 5 diopter myope, well, that's an altogether different story, and that excites me a lot. So again, I think the future here in how we think about Ortho-K, we're going to be looking at new FDA approvals, I think, for lenses with expanded design options. And we still do need FDA approval for Ortho-K for myopia control in general. But just to summarize again, advancements and new lens design, the last 20 years have seen us evolve from pretty much all spherical lenses with fixed diameters and optic zones to now being able to include torics, quadrispecifics, freeform designs, lots of different diameters, larger diameters, smaller optic zones, better alignment, and tackling more difficult patients with higher prescriptions because of the evolution of the software we have to fit lenses to eye. Again, really an exciting time for doing Ortho-K. There's very few patients now, other than the extremely high prescriptions, who we look at and say, I wouldn't tackle that if I have all the tools that I have now. We should be able to get really good outcomes for all of our patients. And yes, some patients are more difficult than others, and they may pay a higher price. As Dr. Strenzi and Dr. Kuzner mentioned, they talk about chair time. You've got to build in expanded fees for those patients that you think are going to take more chair time, but they understand their higher prescription, and most of those patients are understanding and willing to pay it. So that brings my section to an end. You've got questions, you can send them to me by email, and we'll take a lot of questions, I think, here as we panel up and finish out our time today.
Yeah, I can take your questions, Jason. Let's see what we got in the questions here. Just looking to see. Here's a great question to kind of kick us off. Jason, could you define like eccentricity and how that data is used?
Yeah, so again, our cornea is generally unoperated, unsurgically altered corneas flatten as we move from the center of the cornea to the periphery. And that rate of flattening is different for every patient. And so in order to create a lens that has the proper amount of central clearance or properly sits where we want it to be in the center and lands properly at the end of the return zone, eccentricity values help us understand how much depth there is, a change in depth from the center to the point of landing. So without the eccentricity value, there's a little bit of guesswork involved, and the labs are really good at speculating without it, but it's just that much better when we've got the eccentricity. So eccentricity, again, is really just the rate of flattening that's built into the natural cornea. And when we measure that and communicate that to the lab, they can do a better job of giving us a better fit.
Yeah, and some Ortho-K lenses have some of that eccentricity built into their alignment curves. So it's not like that alignment zone, like you were talking about, that dark ring on the outside the reverse treatment. Sometimes it's not one curvature through that whole zone. Sometimes it's a eccentric or a curve with eccentricity added to it. And so again, it's just kind of, it also helps determine the depth of the cornea. So from limbus to apex of the cornea, somebody who has a high eccentricity with a certain K value or a low eccentricity with the same Ks, their corneal depth will be different, which leads to a different Ortho-K lens, which is why using topography over K's and RX gives you a more accurate lens fit. So eccentricity is important in Ortho-K. I don't think you necessarily have to like dive into it a ton as a fitter. I don't know, Jason, you're more academic and you're just so brilliant in your designs. Do you look at eccentricity? Because I don't really. I know that it plays a role, but I'm grateful that my topography does the work.
I would just say this, that if you have access to it, great. A more user-friendly approach may be actually getting the true sagittal depth of your cornea at different core diameters and communicating that to the lab. That would be the better way to do it. But in light of that, I don't typically look at eccentricity that much unless, again, I know there are designs that we will work with where if you provide them the eccentricity value, they will take that into account in their design, but it's not
Yep.
critical.
Yeah, I would agree. It's just helpful data and getting a good fit in certain cases. Do you use toric? Um, these are more specific to your presentation, Dr. J. Does using toric Ortho-K lens induce more toricity in the future?
Uh, no, I don't believe it does, but I will say this. I will say this, and so I'm assuming this is kind of what they're referring to. I don't know how many people over the years, how many times over the years that I have seen people's toricity increase as they grow. Okay. And I don't know if you've seen that too, but I've got patients where I fitted them in Ortho-K lenses when they were 6 years old and they had a diopter of corneal astigmatism. And they fast forward to like when they're 11 and they're having trouble all of a sudden with their lenses. They're not fitting as well. They're not centering as well. And you can't figure it out. And you maybe even go to the point of washing them out and you realize they've got two diopters of sil now, and you think, did my lens cause that? But then I think if you look at even soft toric wears or glasses wears, I think there's a period of time between that early prescription development phase and like late teens, early 20s, where I think our cylinder naturally does increase. And sometimes it increases through the changes in the corneal curvature, but sometimes it even just increases in that a lot of our patients will manifest more of it when you refract them because maybe they have less accommodative ability or maybe their corneal shape has changed in some way, shape, or form where aberrations come into play. But I definitely see more people taking more sil as they grow. I don't think it's personally induced by the lens.
I have a comment on that. I have a
Yeah, go
question.
for it, Jamie.
And maybe I'm just spitballing here, but I used to see this a lot too. When I was washing kids out that were fitted out of a spherical fitting set.
Mhm.
And part of me wondered if they should have been in a toric initially. Okay. And then they're in a lens that's not fitting correctly. Like you said, it's rocking. And then the cornea, as they're growing, just kind of changes. Are we inducing cylinder that way because they should have
I
been in a toric and they're in a sphere?
I
How do
think
we
that's
know
brilliant. No, I think that's
that's
brilliant. That to me is a far more likely reason for that to happen is if you fit somebody in a spherical lens and they're wearing that thing 8 hours a day, mashing down in the superior cornea,
mhm.
you might induce still that way for sure. I think you're dead on. If there's any scenario where a lens creates sil, it's when you don't fit a toric when you should have.
Mhm. Yeah, because I saw that so much when I joined a practice that had been fitting for 10 years off of a fit set. And when we watched those kids out as teenagers, they had two diopters of sil that were not in the initial case. And I just thought to myself, like, what are we doing? But I'm wondering if it's because they're all fit in spherical designs, because that's all we had back then. That's my theory. I have no proof behind it. I just didn't know what you
I
guys,
think
I
that
have
makes
no
sense.
idea. Yeah.
It's kind of like wearing, shoes that are too small, sort of thing. Like your body compensates for that.
If you did it for 5 years, yeah, you'd probably find your shoe is a little bit, or your foot's a little different.
Yeah, yeah. Last question based on your lecture, Jason, is what do you think about Ortho-K on patients who are unhappy with their LASIK or even RK?
I'd be a little afraid of RK. I've done it once or twice. I'm not crazy about it. I don't find RK patients don't tend to be real tolerant of anything touching their corneas a lot of times. I've done this a lot on post LASIK and it works fine. I will say this that it takes longer, I think, for the effect to really work. And sometimes you may have to end up with curves that you didn't expect. Meaning, what I mean by that is you may end up having to be in a much flatter base curve than you thought you would need to be in because again, the measurement of the post LASIK cornea with your topography may not be quite the same as a normal cornea. So, but definitely have a lot of patients over the years who had LASIK, and in some ways it's kind of easy to fit them because they've already got a reverse geometry cornea. Naturally, all you got to do is enhance it a little bit, so the lens tends to center pretty well.
How about you ladies? Have you done any post LASIK eyes? Personally, I would agree with you that it takes longer. Like there's a bit more troubleshooting. It's not like the plug and chug like typical topography gives you. But do you guys have any tips on success, or do you feel comfortable doing post LASIK eyes?
I personally have not done it. I feel like the expectations are going to be too high for post LASIK patients, in my opinion.
That's a challenge.
Just, you know, we know what we know about post LASIK patients. So I just personally wouldn't be my first method of correction I would go to.
Yeah, I would say I haven't done it either, but if I did, I would do a topography guided design.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Are there contraindications to patients using Ortho-K, say like Ehlers-Danlos? Does that fall in your keratoconus group?
Uh, I don't know. I don't think it would stop me. I mean, I would be hesitant on someone who has corneal disease or past infectious issues or something, but I don't think I don't think so. Not Ehlers-Danlos for sure. I'm not sure what other. I think I'd take each one kind of on its own merit and try to weigh whether or not that patient's cornea actually had risk.
Yeah. The another thing too is, eyes with Ehlers-Danlos from an axial length perspective may not respond the same because there's that whole other stretchy collagen aspect of it.
Yeah.
So from a, myopia correction versus axial length management, there's probably expectations there, but from a myopic correction standpoint, I would agree with you. They tend to be higher myopes too. I don't
Yeah.
like you don't see it that often, but the patients I've seen were -8 and -10, and so that kind of makes Ortho-K difficult, period.
Mhm.
I think from vision correction, I think if their prescription is in the range, I don't see an issue with it. I think, like you're saying, you may have other things going on at the same time that make it less of a good idea.
Yeah. Um, how about you, Dr. Srenzi? Who do you think are poor candidates for Ortho-K? Kind of leaning off that topic.
I think, when you think about just children, I always look at their maturity. I mean, it's really important that if there are any sort of complications that they're addressed very quickly. So I want them to be good communicators. If I'm looking in the slit lamp and I see tons of bleph and I see their fingernails are disgusting, I'm not going to be putting them in Ortho-K. So those are probably two things that I look at from the get-go.
How about you, Jamie? Do you have any thoughts on who you would avoid?
I mean, I had one recently. I think I've told you about the story where, there's a lot more kids having like sensory issues, maybe on the spectrum. I did have one child that was not disclosed in his history that he had a sensory issue. And as soon as I put that lens on the eye, he had a complete meltdown. And so that was not a really fun day at my office. And his mom's like, well, he does have an issue with like textures. And I'm like, I mean, probably not the best option to put an Ortho-K lens on the eye if it's a child that has issues with even just like the clothes on their body or tags, things like that. So I think the world is kind of changing a little bit that way too. So just looking at their overall kid and their personality, that's not necessarily the best candidate. Yeah, I would say that. I think we talked before about some of the refractive issues when they have a lot of cylinder. I've had some kids come to me that got referred that are like basically all mixed astigmatism. Not the best candidate that way. But that's what I would say is it.
Yeah. There's another question that came in here and it said, what's your basic troubleshooting for like frowny face, smiley face, lateral displacement of Ortho-K? And I mean, I can just answer that. And that's the reverse toric base curves that Jason talked about. I mean, you're like, you might be the only person who like totally understands that. Cause even I was like hanging on. So I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge like how good you really are at this, Jason, and how the rest of us just really hang on to everything you say. And thanks again for sharing your expertise with us. But let's get back to the real question here. When you guys see those frowny face, smiley face, so we're basically talking about different directions of lens displacement. What are you looking at to make those changes? Do you have any like basic tips for somebody who's maybe just getting going with Ortho-K?
I would say if it's riding up or lateral, those are both indications that your lens is too shallow, and so you need to steepen up something, um, or add toricity if you go back and look and see if that's the problem. Again, a toric cornea with the rule toric cornea, well, a toric cornea at all, with a spherical lens, the lens will always decenter. It can't stay in the middle. It's just not possible. Um, the bigger one is kind of the frowny face, which is a little more challenging, I think, to deal with, but it usually means that the lens is too deep. Um, and in that case, a lot of times the way I would deal with it, so fixing a smiley face or a lateral decentration, I'm usually working the return zone, deepening the return zone. When I'm moving to a frowny face, I'm usually flattening my alignment zone because I'm trying to get the lid to grab a hold of that edge a little bit and pull it up better. Like if the edges are too tight and there's just nothing standing off in the periphery for the lids to grab hold of, the lenses are going to keep sliding down. If you create some edge lift all the way around, the upper lid will hold the lens and keep it up a little bit better, and you will. So I would say I would usually manipulate the alignment zone flatter in a frowny face and the return zone deeper in the other situations.
And when
Yeah, and
I first got started, honestly, the best thing that I did was I made myself a little grid. And it said exactly like what to change with which each outcome. Because when you first get started with Ortho-K too, you might be doing like one a month, one every couple months. So it's hard to kind of get into the swing of things. So even if you like take something from maybe Dr. Jedlicka's lecture and just make a little cheat sheet of it. But now there's a lot of platforms too, where you can just like look at the maps and it tells you exactly how much to change it, which we're super spoiled nowadays. But yeah, I had a cheat sheet for the first couple of years, especially I was doing Ortho-K. So don't be afraid to do that just to help cement your knowledge.
And that's where consultation comes in too. Like if you can get an image, I like how you mentioned, Jason, in your lecture that the topography tells the story. Like Ortho-K, GP, fluorescein pattern, the patient is upright versus laying down. You have more lid interaction. So the fluorescein pattern it's good info, but it's not the end all story like the actual mapping of the cornea is. And so you can certainly take an image of the fluorescein pattern, but sharing the topography with your consulting team can help them make those adjustments too. And if you're not quite sure which map to send them, send them all. They'll search through the data and help you pick out the one. So do the axial, do the tangential, do the elevation map, like do whatever you think maybe shows different things. And then you'll learn from them. I think, as a contact lens resident, we have to call the consultation team for every fit because we just don't know what we're doing. And you learn so much from the consultation team. They're not just there to help you order. And so those would be great ones too. If you're, hey, I'm just getting started with Ortho-K. This is what my lens looks like. What do you see here? And they will happily talk you through that. So those are really good resources to help you learn in addition to, events like today.
Yeah, and I love when you and Jamie were talking about how often to replace lenses every 1 year, is it 2 years? One thing that I learned the hard way is if a patient comes in with that lens that's a year old and the topography looks kind of funky, to not jump into changes right away, but order a duplicate lens and see them back, and that can certainly save a lot of time.
100% always, because there shouldn't be a situation where that lens looks good at 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and then magically between 6 and 12 months the lens doesn't fit. Like, what's the likelihood of that happening? But I made the same mistake too when I first started. I was making changes off of an old lens. Same thing with the corneal gas perm. You wouldn't do that off of a 10-year-old gas perm,
Yeah, another thing that I think is helpful is something like a deep cleaner enzyme or Progent treatment on a year-old lens if because they could have a mild biofilm inducing some corneal change. And so if I have like a 9-month visit for some reason because the kid has noticed some vision change or the adult, and they were good at, say 4 months, but now 5 months later they're not seeing as well, the first thing I'm going to do is a deep clean on the lens and then see what happens because it's the same thing where like refreshing that lens and giving that cornea a little chance to rehab and see what happens there before I make them buy a lens at 10 months, and restart the fitting process. Sometimes just a deep clean gets them back to where they need to be. And certainly addressing things like papillae allergies, things like that too.
Yeah, I actually tell all of my kiddos that they have to use like a Progen every single month. And that has just helped me so much because if they come to the 6 month and it looks funny, I will ask them when the last time they cleaned their lens was, and they will admit they haven't done it. And then I have them come back in 2 weeks and it's like magic. Like all of a
Yeah.
sudden everything,
Mhm.
all the complaints went away. So I just tell them up front when I'm first fitting them that like you have to do this. And then when they come in with an issue, they'll be like, oh shoot, you told me to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to propose a question to you guys. I'll make myself a little vulnerable here. When you hear lectures on orthokeratology, sometimes you hear like you have to have axial length in order to determine if there's progression or not. One of the ways that makes sense to me to determine whether or not they've progressed with the refraction is to do like the over refraction of the lens.
Mhm.
Because if you get plus a half in the beginning, like if you're getting a minus OR afterwards, then that's progression, right? So what are y'all's thoughts on that? And do you do that?
I think that makes 100% sense. I mean, it's optics, right? Like,
Mhm.
don't you think it's a simple optics equation? Like, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
why every time I talk to someone that's like, they want to do a cold start and they're like, what do I need for my cold start? I'm like, do you need axial length on day one? I don't think you do. Like, I think you
Mhm.
can get a lot of information at the beginning until you really get ramped up. Like, I'd rather someone spend their money on a better topographer to make better lenses versus get a crappy topographer and get axial length. That's my own opinion. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
So I have a really interesting patient I saw this last week that's brings this home. And it's a patient that has been in our clinic for a few years, but I've never seen them. They've been seen by some of our other doctors and residents. And she came in complaining of a little bit of blurry vision at distance. And the my student intern had over refracted them and gotten like -1 1/4 and -2 over their lenses. Okay. So that should mean that they progressed by a diopter and a quarter or 2 diopters, but they're only 20/25 without their lenses. And so I looked at the design and it was a software-based design and the prescription in the lens on the right, then both lenses were like +2s.
Mhm.
So then I realized I don't really know what the original Jessen factor of these lenses was. I don't really know what this overfraction tells me at all. I'm certainly not going to flatten their lens by 2.5 diopters or 2 diopters to achieve one line of improvement. So we did fortunately have axial length measurements the last couple of years. And I could go and repeat axial length and find out the amount of axial length change that had happened actually since 2 years ago when they got lenses last. And I was able to create the change in power or base curve of the lens based off of using the axial length rather than off the overfraction. So I will say this, it's something you can probably live without, like you say. It is very reassuring to have it. It's very reassuring to be able to show a parent that the axial length has not changed or it's changed minimally. I think it's a tool that lets you practice at a much higher level, but I don't think you have to have it to start. But again, the overrefraction, of course, is 100% critical. What a patient sees, an over or a refraction on a 7-year-old kid who's doing ortho K is pretty meaningless. It's pretty meaningless, right? Because they could probably take -3 and still see 20/20 with their multifocal cornea and their gobs of accommodation. So the real proof is your GP over your lens over refraction tells you whether it's progression or not.
Mhm.
The for those of you that want to know more about kind of discerning axial length, something that I use is There's a paper from 2021 by Paul Chamberlain on axial length targets for myopia control, and there's a nice little table. I just cut it out here, and it basically compares two different studies. One study was mostly Asian kids. Another study included kids with Caucasian backgrounds, and they grouped them into myopes and emmetropes. And they showed, age 8 through 14, how much they changed per year. And again, I think what it helps me do is I look at the change from, year over year, how much has my kiddo using Ortho-K changed, and if they've changed more like an emmetrope, then I know that there's a little bit of just growth because they're a kid and they're growing. And so if their axial length change is more like an emmetrope, then I feel pretty good about where my treatment is because, even orthokeratology, soft multifocal lenses, they're not 100% axial length control. They don't have 100% control over changing myopia. The data doesn't show that. So a little bit of change is still meaning that your treatment is doing a good job. And that's where having axial length has helped me, without axial length, I can see that their vision's doing well. I can do an over refraction and assume that things are doing pretty good. And then make sure their cornea is healthy. But having this little table from that paper, which is open access, by the way, I think it is anyway. Anyway, having this little table is really helpful on just seeing if they're still progressing at the rate of an untreated myope, then I know that I need to do something else. Versus changing like an emmetrope, then I know that I'm probably doing pretty good.
Well, and if you have a biometer and you can measure axial length. So again, this person I saw last week, when we did axial length and noticed that her axial length had changed, but her axial length was still only like 22.9. And so it's like I just don't care that hard about it, where if her axial length was 25.9, I would be like, holy cow, we need to do something to rein in this change. A half diopter is too much for you theoretically. So again, the axial length is really the critical part of this. Their prescription is really meaningless in terms of the health of their eye. It's the axial length that really matters. And if you don't have it, you can still estimate it, through calculating with their Ks and Rx, but it's not the same.
Yeah, I agree. Um, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but the understanding their axial length on a scale of risk for pathologic myopic disease in the future is helpful too. So those 26, I care a lot more if they're changing by 0.1 every year versus our, 23.5 millimeter eyes. Let's talk about, we were talking about, with the frowny face, the smiley face, and that kind of thing. And if you guys see that, let's say there's a patient that moves to your area and they're wearing an unknown lens and they want to continue their Ortho-K. Or maybe you know what they're wearing and you decide, okay, I need more from this lens design, so I'm going to switch from brand A to brand B. Do you guys wash out, refit? How do you tackle these eyes that, need something different and you're going to change design?
I've run into this actually twice in the last month where I've had some kiddos from Russia, and there's just no way that we're going to get these lenses. They're not going to go back to get the lenses. So I did a washout in those cases, and it's certainly not ideal, especially during the school year, but we just kind of talk about how it's a temporary pain for, a long-term solution. Even if they did have, it's kind of hard because if there is a certain design that is available in the US, sometimes I just don't really love them being in a design that I don't feel really comfortable managing or being able to customize fully to. But I think, for me anyways, just having that, just kind of verbalizing my thought process to parents and being very open on why I would want to watch them out, just creates a lot of, understanding and willingness to go through that period of time.
I would
Yeah,
say that if you if you wash them out, you will gain a new baseline topography. You will open up the door for customized software-driven options, etc. If if the patient seems averse to that, um, I've many times dug out a fitting set of lenses and just put a lens on the eye and look at the fit and over refract them and go, all right, this is too shallow. Go get a new one go another one that's a little bit deeper, and find the one in your fitting set that gives you the best fit. And then you can always calculate the needed base curve with your over refraction. And that has worked really well in many cases. Again, I wouldn't say it would work well in every situation. Sometimes you need to do a washout, but if you have a fitting set around, that is one of the benefits of having diagnostic lenses around is you can just kind of refit them with some known lenses and go from there.
I will say, like, if I have their baseline maps, and maybe it was one of my patients,
Hmm.
I have done refits based on their baseline maps
Yep.
into a different design. If it's from your own topographer and they're good
Yep.
baseline maps, I've done that without washing out. I actually just did that like this month.
Yep.
And it works totally fine. It's all about having that baseline map. So
Yeah,
Definitely.
if the first lens is really decentered, it can take time for that recentering to happen because the
mhm,
cornea being a tabletop, the new lens
right.
is still going to want to go where that decentering is. I don't know, Jason, with your sort of work that you've done, can a new lens that maybe has better parameters based on the baseline map, that Jamie took a couple years ago, can a new improved fit overcome that decentering? Or do you have them wash out like 3 or 4 nights, or just to get a little image off, or what do you think?
I don't usually have them wash out, but there is merit to washing out because again, it'll take weeks or months for them to completely wash, but you will wash out 80-90% of the correction within 3 nights probably. So I think if you want to do that, if the patient has a way to function for a few days, or send them home with a handful of dailies of different powers and say wear these until for a couple nights and wash. I actually like the idea of putting a soft lens on it. I think soft lenses actually help the washout period accelerate. I don't know why, but that's just my opinion. So you could, but I typically don't. I just say move to the new lens, and then if after like a week they're still decentered and I think the lens should be better by now, maybe I'd wash them out.
Yeah, so you think a new lens can overcome the decentering of a previously poor fit
In
lens?
time. In
Yeah,
time.
in
Yeah.
time. Perfect. I like that too, because then the patients are still like over time they should be getting better vision and they don't have to make a big
Yeah.
change. So I would agree with you, Jamie, that I think you can do it. And I
It
have done
depends on
it as
it
well.
depends how unhappy the patient is with where they are. Because I just refitted somebody who came to me from another office and he was 20/40 and 2100. So I mean, whatever I fit him in, even if it doesn't fit right, over time, while that lens is getting a better fit, he's going to be no worse off than he has been, and he will be better off, even if it's not ideal.
Mhm.
Um,
So, kind of on that same note, when
yeah.
you guys have parents that are really concerned about their child not being able to see very well when you're first starting
Mhm.
orthokeratology, do you often send them with daily disposables of decreasing powers, trying to guess at their prescription change, or what is both of y'all's approach or all of y'all's approach?
Usually I only do that if I'm doing a washout and I'm like sending higher up lenses. Honestly, what I've done is I start kids on a Friday or Thursday, and I see them back on Monday, and they're usually totally fine. And I just say that way they aren't rushed trying to go to school in the morning or it's school night. They have time to kind of like, it's a Friday or a Saturday. They have more time to adjust to insertion removal. If their vision's a little fuzzy on a Saturday, it's not the end of the world unless they have some major athletic event or something. And that always works really well for me. And I think with the new lens designs, they get to 20/20 super fast. I know that the companies won't promise it, but I often see like them get to pretty good vision after nights like 2 or 3. What do you
I
guys
do it
do?
more. I do it more with adults. Like if I have an adult who's a
Mhm.
-5, I know they're
Yeah.
gonna be miserable for a few days, but kids, no, almost never.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually do the fit on Friday. Um, then just say, I'll have a written note for you if you need to sit in the front of the classroom for a few days.
Mhm.
Couple other topics that I was curious about. I have 2 questions left, and we have 8 minutes. Um, something that's really come to, at least in those of us that are big nerds in myopia, is screening for keratoconus on anybody that we're going to do orthokeratology on, because after we change that cornea, it's harder to get that map and understanding So you would do it with tomography on something like a pentacam. So for some of us, we may need to co-manage with ophthalmology or another optometrist that has a device that can image the back of the cornea. What do you guys think about this? Is this merit? Is this overdoing it? How do you feel about screening your Ortho-K patients before you get them going?
I personally have the Pentacam, so I'm kind of spoiled to where I have the ability to do that. But kind of like with Jamie with the biometry co-management, I think it opens up some good co-management opportunities. I will say that there is a lot of bad data out there on orthokeratology, so you want to definitely have a conversation with the ophthalmologist that they are on board with Ortho-K because there are some that just don't really know that it is a safe option and that you know what you're doing. But I think that would open up some great co-management possibilities. What do you guys think?
I think it would be great. I will be fully transparent. Anyone that's heard me lecture, I just got a pentacam a month ago. So I've been doing this, for a long time without having that data. And I think, we're just getting to the point where more optometry offices are just getting baseline topographers. I just think trying to realistically, how many people are going to have access to a pentacam? It's pretty low. I think ideally in a perfect world, yes. What do you think, Jason? But if it's between treating their myopia management or not, just because you don't have a pentacam, I don't know. The chances of that kid having keratoconus versus that kid progressing into myopia, I don't know. You just got to think of the lesser evil, in my opinion. That's what I mean. I don't know.
1 in 375.
Right.
Yeah.
You just got to think of it that way.
I think you could maybe screen for it when you question. I have a pre-Ortho-K questionnaire. It's asked if there's anybody in their family with keratoconus and see what their odds are. Because obviously that makes your odds 10 times higher or something. You could you could find out if there's an immediate family member with it. If again, I have a pentacam, so I'm going to look at it, but I'd still do it without it. I did for most of my life, and I think you just have to be. I think you have to be. Oh, you just have to be a good clinician, and that means that as that child grows, and you should be putting their Ortho-K lens on them every year, and you should be doing retinoscopy through their Ortho-K lens every year. And if you do retinoscopy through their Ortho-K lens, you will see scissoring if there's any sign of early keratoconus, and you just have to immediately take action. And I don't think it's any different than how we manage every other child out there, right? I mean, we don't do pentacam on every kid who walks in, right? How do we figure out if they have keratoconus? Because they have reduced BCVA, we see a scissor, and then we throw them on our topography, and then we find it. And I think you can do it the same way here. You just have to, again, you really have to do ret over their lens to see it. That's what you have to do.
Yeah, and the reason you say over the lens is because
otherwise they have a multifocal cornea. And so you're going to see all sorts of wild, wacky stuff when you scope somebody who's done Ortho-K. You're going to see basically they're wearing a high-ad multifocal contact, and it's going to be all scissory because of their treatment. But if you put their lens on, it negates all of that. And now they have a pristine front surface, just like because they are wearing a GP. It should be a perfect front surface and a perfect optical system when you scope them through their GP.
You're so smart, Jason. You're so smart. That's why you're so smart. And it's just retinoscopy, which we all learned.
I agree. So to kind of wrap up this session, because we're done in about 4 minutes, let's say you're 10 years ago, 20 years ago, newer to Ortho-K. What do you wish you knew back then that you know now?
To fit more people in torics. Because I've said this for the past decade, man. We used to just do torics as a troubleshooting. The lens is decentering. Now we'll switch them into a toric. I didn't want to do it in the first place. It cost me $20 more at the lab, or all these other dumb excuses that we had. And I just think we need to just go off of topography-based designs and fit people in the lens that they need. And I don't know, I'll die on that hill.
I'll call you out on this, Jamie Kuzner. You haven't been practicing for a decade, so
yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Barely.
how about you, Ariel? What do you wish you knew? now that you wish you knew?
You know, I learned orthokeratology mostly, I mean, in practice. I learned about it some in school, of course, but in my residency, and I was still terrified to start. So I think I would just go back and tell myself, you know, don't be afraid to start. And I think that that's a lot of the hard part for folks, or kind of the barrier, is it just seems kind of intimidating, you know. And what I did is I took lots of pictures, had all the pictures, all the topographies, and I would just sit with a consultant and have them walk me through their thought process. And it's amazing how many times the same problem happens.
Mhm.
And that's how I learned, but I was nervous to start.
I have one other thing to add before Jason has his like last comment that's going to be
Yeah.
amazing. I also feel like this is what I tell people too. The ortho K is not the hard part, it's the kid. If you can manage the kid and the parents, it is fine. And I think once I became a mom myself, you just got to go in there with that mom energy or dad energy or aunt or uncle energy, and you just have to control the room. And if you can control the room and the emotions, like everything else is easy.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right, Jason, enlighten us.
My
What have you
last
learned?
my last comment, that's brilliant. You know, my last
Yeah.
brilliant comment is I wish I knew the same thing Jamie did. There you go.
Or
That's
Torix
my brilliant, right? That's my brilliant, because Jamie is more brilliant than I am even. So
and
that's
dad energy. All
right.
right.
Uh,
I think the one thing that I would take away is that when you get started, you're not expected to know, and so it's okay not to know. Like when you said, "I'm going to make myself vulnerable," Ariel, it's more about just we all have been there. Like we all try to figure out, can we do it with just over fractions? Can we, what is my logical thinking actually logical? And so it's okay not to know. So I think it's okay to reach out with those questions that feel simple, because we've all probably been there. And it's contact lenses is a friendly world. So that be sure to reach out with your questions, whether it's to a mentor of the lab, or at a meeting. Get up to the mic and ask the questions you need so you can take that back to your practice. All right, with that, thanks everyone. What a great morning and program on myopia, and hope to see you at another Woo You event in the future. Ariel, do you have anything to close up for Woo You?
No, we don't have any wrap up slides. Just a reminder, there is no QR code for tonight. We will get those CE certificates emailed to you all within 4 weeks, but realistically, it comes a lot sooner than that. But thank you guys so much, Dr. Jedlicka, Dr. Kuzner, Dr. Messer. You guys are awesome, and I learned a ton from this, and we appreciate you guys sharing your knowledge.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye, guys.